Chapter 81 The Way to the North. Zion could be seen with a tranquil and calm expression on his face. We just found out the truth about Vine Manor. Thales' countenance remained unchanged. After he went through what he did with Morat, he could also transform into the leader of the Mount Wa sect, Buchan. Zion gave the most perfect smile and continued speaking. We interrogated the pawns of the gang at Vine Manor. I have no choice but to say. You played a good trick that day, Prince Thales. Zion cast Thales a ruminating gaze. Even in a hopeless situation, you were still able to drive a wedge between the Blood Clan and Blood Bottle gang in order to avoid being killed. Thales silently exclaimed in his heart, he finally found out about this. But currently, his thoughts were messy and disordered. He did not have the mood and effort to deal with the master of tricolor iris flowers. Thales spread his hands indifferently. I do not know what you are talking about. Soon, you are going on a long journey, be careful, the immortals are not easy to deal with. Zion placed his hands behind his back, his smiling eyes occasionally glinting brightly. Before the enemy of the wolves and his immortal hunters group fought their way up to the summit of Wild Vast Mountain, forcing them to sign the Treaty of Subordination between human countries and immortals, on numerous dark nights, the immortals fed on humans. They must have been yearning for the taste of human blood till this day, they will always bring upon problems in the human nation. If you share a boat with a jackal and wolf, you will run the risk of having your boat overturned. This speech sounds so awe-inspiring and righteous, but since this is coming from your mouth, Thales scratched his head. He sighed, I return what you just said back to you, original employer of the Blood Clan. Zion stopped smiling. They stared at each other in silence. Thales felt increasingly uneasy. Zion's gaze changed and suddenly he was smiling again. Nonetheless, I indeed owe you a favor. Thales furrowed his brows a little. Zion laughed, thank you for the other day when you ran into that assassination attempt. Even though I know you were not thinking about being targeted in my place at all. Was he expressing goodwill? What day is today? Why is everyone expressing goodwill to me? Is today Children's Day? No need. Thales was dispirited. You have already repaid the favor by voting, yes, to support me in inheriting the throne, did you not? However, Koshter's words from earlier immediately circulated in his mind. The suzerains were doing this out of self-preservation. Thales suddenly lifted his head and stared bemusedly at Zion. What were you thinking? Why did you cast your vote on me? You do not seem like the type of person who would simply change your stance just because you are angered by betrayal. Even if a Jadastar becomes the heir to the throne under that situation, it does not correspond with your benefits as a suzerain, correct? Zion stared at him for 3 seconds and then, slightly raised his brows. Who knows, since I also did not have a chance under that situation. Zion chuckled, maybe I was just thinking, compared to those cunning people, the prince who is naive and inexperienced, is a better heir for the kingdom, because no matter what, you were more like a pushover that would be easier to control. Thales frowned. Can these dukes speak in a way a normal human can understand? Just kidding, Zion laughed out loud. Thales rolled his eyes. But before you leave, your highness, I have a gift for you. Please do kindly accept the gift. Zion waved his hand lightly. That day at Vine Manor, an old soldier of Starlight Brigade recognized you. However, it was because he did not utter a word that you managed to leave safely. Otherwise, what waited for you would have been 2 supreme class knights. Thales' heart trembled. He looked into the distance, at a man ridden with fatigue being roughly shoved into the Jadastar private army's fleet of carriages. Who was that? Zion patted his shoulder and gave him a mysterious smile. You do not have to worry about him being my spy. Gennard was once the Duke of Star Lake's personal guard. He should come in handy. Thales had a skeptical look on his face. But he once again remembered what Koshter said. The strength of South Coast Hill was weakened due to family feud. Thales muttered, Duke Zion, I heard that it has only been 2 years since you became a duke, right? Zion furrowed his brows as he nodded. Sadly, my father passed away 2 years ago. I returned from my travels in the Eastern Peninsula to inherit the title of the Duke. Thales was careful in his choice of words. It may be presumptuous for me to ask, but I heard that, it was due to family feud that the old Duke of Iris Flowers. Zion lightly held his breath as he maintained a perfect expression. Yes, my few uncles were lusting after my father's position. They used the excuse that my father was too oppressive to them. In the end, they became insane after they failed. So they made a risky move to pay a huge amount of money to hire an assassin and murder my father. Thales sighed. So, is this the reason why you said, Eternal Star City does not welcome murder, on that day? Zion inhaled lightly and nodded. This can be considered as one of the reasons. Thales fell into silence. There were even traces of his involvement in the internal fight of the Covenier family 2 years ago. The prince recalled Kessel V's methods and means while he asked in a puzzled tone, Your Grace, was your father's passing really due to internal strife, or is there another story behind it? Zion was secretly astonished. This brat. What do you mean? The young duke could no longer maintain his expression as he retorted with a grim expression on his face. Thales did not notice Zion's expression. He lowered his head and continued to recall the possibilities of the royal family interfering with the inheritance fight. All 19 noble families will be completely swallowed up. The prince murmured, was there a deeper, more essential truth to the duke's death? In order for the families that have existed since the country was founded to this day, to continue existing. For example, the unfortunate death of His Grace. Was it needed to protect the continuation of the family, to protect the future of the next generation so that they would not be subjected to external infringements? Thales lifted his head, and with a penetrating gaze, he tried to make out something from Zion's eyes. What do you think? In that very moment, it was as if something exploded in Zion's heart. His heart raced and his breath quickened as he stared at the second prince in front of him with his eyes wide opened. However, there was a storm raging in his mind. Why did he intentionally mention my father's death? Continuation of the family. The life or death of Iris Flowers. He is a part of the royal family, so he must know that the first Duke Covendier, who was Constellation's first chief of the Secret Intelligence Department and chief of intelligence, as well as the highest person in charge of Operation World Cleansing, over 600 years ago. So, the future of the next generation. Covendier's next generation, was he talking about me or Hill? The weather was freezing cold, but Duke Zion Covendier, who had excellent self-restraint, broke out in cold sweat without even realizing it himself. Damn it! Regarding my father's death, regarding that matter. Zion clenched his fist tightly. Regarding Hill's identity, what exactly does he already know? The young duke lifted his head and stared at Thales with brilliant, shining eyes. He is threatening me. Warning the Iris Flowers. Damn it! Zion's breathing became chaotic without him noticing. Only then did Thales notice Zion's ashen complexion and suddenly realize the truth. Did I step over the line by asking about his father's death early in the morning? Sorry, Thales smiled apologetically, I was being too presumptuous. With his eyes, he saw Zion taking a deep breath and giving out a rare, forceful smile. Smiling was normally nothing to him that seemed submissive and obsequious. Zion felt bitterness in his heart, but he immediately closed his eyes and bowed down as he said with much difficulty, no. Prince Thales, Tricolor Iris Flowers understands your meaning. From this moment onwards, South Coast Hill is willing to serve and follow you without any complaints. Why did he bow down all of a sudden? Thales was shocked as he took a step back. I did not say anything, why did he want to bow down to me? Also, he already understands what I was trying to convey. His reaction is very fast. Thales squinted his eyes in suspicion. Sir Zion, do you really understand what I was saying? Zion clenched his teeth tightly together. Are you forcing me to make a promise? What I said was whether that family feud was not that simple. Yes, I understand. Zion lifted his head abruptly and his eyes shone with resolve. Covendier family's teachings are very clear, it is better to die for friends than foes. He stared at Thales in a serious manner. I just figured out that you are right. If Iris Flowers wants to flourish more and more, we have to be careful in choosing our ally. For example, you, the only qualified prince of Constellation, the bloodline of the kingdom. What is he doing? Thales furrowed his brows. Did another person take over his body? But Gilbert's voice came from a distance away, they had to leave now. The second prince's fleet of carriages rode into the distance. But Zion was still standing at the same place in a daze. Ashford, his butler, walked up from behind him. He was just about to say something before Zion stopped him by lifting up his hand abruptly. He only took action when the fleet of carriages disappeared into a remote distance. Zion was breathing unevenly when he nodded. All right, even a vampire's hearing is useless against such a distance. Ashford furrowed his brows a little. There was something slightly wrong with his master. Did you manage to get anything? Ashford asked carefully. Zion scrunched his brows tightly together as he nodded out of habit. When I asked about the matter regarding the Blood Clan, he instinctively verified it. The vampires are indeed on the journey with them. Zion let out a long sigh before he murmured, he is indeed bold and fearless. Ashford replied respectfully, then we will just act according to our original plan, inform Blood Bottle Gang and start destroying his reputation. No. Zion lifted his head with a determined gaze in his eyes. There was even a hint of resolve in them. Zion glanced at the direction of the fleet of carriages carrying Thales as he squinted his eyes and made a decision. No one can harm Hill. No one. Not even the kingdom's bloodline. Zion Covendier, the young Jade City Mayor, Guardian Duke of South Coast Hill, the master of Constellation's 6 great clans, Tricolor Iris Flowers, whispered to the butler beside him, send word. Ashford raised his eyebrows. Which side? Ashford asked softly. Zion closed his eyes and took a deep breath before he slowly exhaled. That side, Zion quietly said. Ashford did not utter another word. He was waiting for the final confirmation from his master. Zion's voice came through with much difficulty. You know which part to send those words to. Even though Ashford had doubts in his heart, he immediately understood what his master meant as he was good in observing others' speech and behavioral patterns. The old butler nodded and bowed before he left. After a long while, Zion opened his eyes. He mumbled to himself, "The Prince of Constellation, whom I voted for, you carry the fate of the two kingdoms on your back. You will decide whether we will have war or peace. At least, within the kingdom, probably none of Constellation's suzerains dare to endanger your life, right? This is probably what everyone is thinking. Just let it remain that way then." The carriage of the second prince arrived at the northern city gate. From afar, Thales saw the piece of vacant land that the guards cleared. It was separated from the crowd, who came to watch the event. The supreme king of Constellation, Kessel Jadastar, was standing in the middle of the three dukes as he silently looked over at Thales' side. "I will send you off here, your highness." Gilbert stood at his original place and said in a sentimental tone. "Be careful on your journey there. I will wait respectfully for your return." Thales turned around and looked at Gilbert. "If you can only listen to the story of the sorrowful king and the determined royal family, fed to you by the king's partisan, you might as well dig both of your eyes out and only leave your ears to do the job." Thales exhaled. "Thank you, Gilbert." Then Thales took a step back and bowed. "Thank you, teacher." Gilbert was holding onto his staff when he lowered his head and sighed, but eventually he stopped uttering another word. Thales exhaled. With Putre and Wya as company, it was better for Ralph to stay in the carriage with his appearance. Though he did not know why the lively Ida did not leave the carriage, he walked off the carriage towards his father, who seemed to be a tyrant. The three dukes bowed before him. Thales also returned the greeting respectably. The plump guardian duke of the Eastern Sea, Bob Cullen, was huffing and puffing when he sighed in admiration. "Your Highness, although this is unfair to you, I still want to let you know that I am extremely gratified at your courage." Thales nodded absent-mindedly. "It is what I ought to do as the Prince of Constellation." Eastern Sea Hill was so terrified they became cowards. Koshter's version of Constellation emerged in his mind. The guardian duke of the Western Desert, the horrible-looking Fakenhas, continued with his ridicule. He, I once hoped that my son would be as outstanding as you, your highness, but after I took a look at the current situation, I decided to just forget about it. This is far too dangerous." Thales rolled his eyes in front of him. "Thank you for your kind words," Thales replied powerlessly. Western Desert just barely managed to protect itself due to the importance of the Western battle line. He walked towards the teenage girl. Lyanna Tabark, the delicate and pretty teenage Duchess of Blade Edge Hill. She was staring at him with an icy expression. "I think, we all know what kind of heavy burden we have to bear as the last person in the family," she said softly. "But it is exactly because of this that we get to become even stronger," the teenage girl said bluntly. Blade Edge Hill had several parts of its territory become property of the royal family. Lyanna delicately touched the blood moon brooch pinned on her chest and whispered, "Your Highness, since you are leaving soon, I am going to present to you the Tabark family's motto." Thales was stunned for a while. The cold, teenage girl bowed gently and enunciated her words clearly, "Only blood can sharpen the blade." Thales stared at the teenage girl in front of him, who was about 15 or 16 years old. He only came back to his senses after a few seconds and nodded his head solemnly. "I will remember it with my heart and will never dare to forget it," he replied. Thud, asterisk. The king's scepter struck the floor. The three dukes, Cullen, Fakenhas and Lyanna, backed down at the right time. Thales took a few steps forward and bowed lightly. "You underestimate your father, the Iron Hand King, and underestimate the fear he brings upon the whole of Constellation." "You have met Kia," Kessel V quietly said. Thales nodded. "Very good, then you already know exactly what kind of path that you and I, are walking on." Kessel stared at him coldly. The bloody year changed him. Kessel sighed before he quietly continued, "We have enemies in every corner of this world. If you are not careful in your every step, disaster will fall on your head. He treats every suzerain like his enemy and never shows mercy when he suppresses or schemes against them. He treats Constellation as his personal carriage, without controlling his usage of the horsewhip and spurs." Thales sucked in a breath. In Kessel's eyes, he had a very determined gaze. Kessel said slowly, "Head on your journey, young Jadastar. Bring honor to your kingdom and bring honor to your family. Live for Constellation." Thales lifted his head and once again nodded lightly. Gines Bajkovic, who was standing behind the king, could not help but take a step forward. "Brat," the female official seemed a little awkward. Gines eventually drew a deep breath and spoke, filled with complicated emotions. "Remember to practice your sword skills." Thales gave her a smile. "Yes, Madam Gines." Putre and Wya bowed and greeted the king, with the latter saying a few words of encouragement. Thales knew that the time of departure had finally arrived. However, at that very moment, an unexpected person walked to his side, holding onto his walking stick. "Your Highness, when you reach Extit, please help an old man like me to pass a message to an old woman." With his hoarse voice and ugly smile, Morat Hansen spoke to Thales, who had a vigilant expression on his face. With his bad impression of the Black Prophet, Thales asked dubiously, "Which old woman?" Morat grinned. "You will know when you see her." Thales furrowed his eyebrows deeply. On the city gate, which Thales was not paying any attention to, a masked figure slowly disappeared into the air. And so, the carriage fleet with the silver double cross-shaped stars flag and 9-pointed star flag erected on them, slowly departed all the way up to the north. Thales leaned against the wall of the carriage and exhaled. "Wya, do you know why it seemed like everyone was bidding their goodbyes for the very last time when they said their farewells to me? Will King Nuvan really kill me?" He was not counting on Wya to reply him. However, the second prince's attendant, Wya Kaso, who kept staring out of the carriage, gently rose his head. His face was filled with complicated emotions. "Your Highness. During my time at the Tower of Eradication, my teacher once told me." The next second, Wya said something that made Thales' eyes brighten up. Until a long, long time after, Thales would still occasionally think of these words when he could not sleep at night. Wya Kaso whispered, "Treat every goodbye like the final goodbye, and treat every second of your life as though you managed to survive out of luck. That way, we will never waste our life." Chapter 82 The Weeper. "Your Highness, you are truly beloved among them." The people did not forget that it was Constellation and the Jadestar royal family that guaranteed them such a bountiful life. The speaker was Baron Limmer. As the suzerain of 4 local villages, his castle stood at the point of intersection between those 4 villages. To the south, the Renaissance Avenue, which was situated in the central territory and was covered in yellow fallen leaves, could be seen. To the north, a panoramic view of the birch tree forest, unique to the northern territory, could be seen. This was the 4th morning of their journey north to Extit. They stopped a few times on their way to restock. If all went well, they would be able to enter the northern territory in the evening and reach Broken Dragon Fortress the following night. Although Baron Limmer was only over 30 years old, he was almost as plump as the old Duke Cullen. The Baron laughed to the point that his eyes could almost not be seen. He spoke passionately to the second prince of Constellation, Prince Thales Jadestar, who was surrounded by smiling members of the populace. "The people were looking forward to your arrival very much, and feel extremely honored. The continuation of the Jadestar royal family line is indeed a great show of love by the Sunset Goddess." Baron Limmer stroked his belly and said with a smile, "I believe that in the future, under your rule, Constellation will become even more bountiful and blissful. It will become even more successful than it used to be. We are, after all, the descendants of the Empire." Thales walked along the clean, spotless village where even the mounds of snow were completely swept away. Maintaining the most standard of smiles, he waved at the people who were clad in bright and dazzling clothing. Beside him, Wya, Korra and 5 Jadestar private soldiers anxiously separated him from the crowd. Ida followed behind them, and judging by the way she walked, it was obvious that she was in low spirits. The head of the Jadestar private army, Korra, said with a serious expression, "It is best that we leave immediately, Your Highness. Staying here is really not a good idea." "He is right. Your duty is to serve as an envoy, not to conduct inspections. You are merely passing this place by." Wya stopped a squire in his tracks. Thales nodded and casually made a few hand gestures towards the distance, which no one could understand except for one person. "How is it?" Looking at the prince's hand gestures, Wya furrowed his brows. Displeased, he looked towards the other direction of the village. As expected, Ralph's figure appeared at a secluded place some distance away right at the perfect moment. Racking his brains, he made 2 hand gestures at Thales in reply. "At the back, fake, all of them. Fake, hiya." Thales' heart sank. He looked towards the child who was nearest to him. The child was about 7 or 8 years old, around the same age as him. The child had a dark complexion, and was so thin that he was only skin and bones. He was dressed in obviously ill-fitting clothes. His tiny hands could not reach out of the sleeves at all. His eyes were filled with fear, and he was shivering. However, he deliberately forced himself to flash a fake smile. A man, who was in the prime of his life and had an apathetic gaze, waved his rough and deformed hand with difficulty. A shy woman with a scarf on her head wore a shirt and a skirt that did not match at all in terms of style. The style of her shirt was obviously closer to the ones that are trending in the capital city. An old man who seemed almost 60 was wearing a comical-looking cape that looked like the ones used by nobles to shield themselves from the rain. The lower half of his body was dressed in thin, unlined pants. At a corner where others could not see, he shivered violently from the cold. "And, the spotless village with everyone lining up on both sides of the street to welcome me." Thales heaved a sigh and looked towards Baron Limmer with a smile. Did they think that he was an idiot? "So, there is a Potemkin village, one in this world too. We should have finished restocking by now." Again, Thales gesticulated at Ralph, which no one but he and Ralph could understand. He shook his head and said softly to Wya and Korra, "Let's go." Wya even gave Ralph, who was a distance away and had a profound expression on his face, an angry glare. He then caught up with Thales together with Korra. He was the one who was supposed to be the second prince's attendant. Despite Baron Limmer's reluctance for them to leave, persuasions for them to stay, and his profusely gratuitous farewell, the carriage fleet of Constellation's diplomatic group that was heading north towards Exted prepared to set off. I thought you enjoyed that feeling of being supported by the multitudes. The vice diplomat of the diplomat group, Lord Poutre, took out a tobacco pipe from somewhere and lit it. It produced a thick cloud of smoke which made people feel uncomfortable even just by looking at it. He puffed from it, and looked at the second prince mockingly. No, I would prefer to enjoy the kind of support that is undeceiving and simple, but is sincere. Smiling, Thales took the water a guard passed to him, and I would rather not watch as they are coerced by their suzerains to wear clothes that were prepared beforehand, force the most deliberate smiles, and tell me lies about their happy lives while lining up on both sides of the street for no reason at all in a village that has been swept beforehand, welcoming a prince that they do not actually like. Thales sighed softly. How many people among them do you reckon are smiling, but are actually full of hatred for me, a prince who suddenly appeared? Not even one. Unexpectedly, Poutre denied his words. If you insist on finding some, it would probably only be that plump baron. Thales raised his brows. Poutre scornfully heaved out a mouthful of smoke. Don't think of yourself as too important, future king. In many people's eyes, the nine-pointed star does not even carry as much weight as an ear of wheat. Wheat can fill their bellies. What can the nine-pointed star do? Oh, there are still perks to it. Poutre chuckled. Take for example, their suzerain fed them a good meal and distributed some unwanted clothes to them so that they can welcome some heir of the nine-pointed star who passed by with some semblance of decency. Thales' expression was grave. Before entering the carriage, he had glanced at this village, which was on the border of the Northern Territory and the Central Territory, for the last time. He could not help but say, this is the intersection point between Renaissance Avenue and the Birch Tree Forest. The specialties of the Northern Territory and goods from the Central Territory both will pass by here. There is no shortage of land and hunting grounds, too. But the people here are still so poverty-stricken. Is it because too much of their pay is embezzled, or is it a problem with the land, or high taxes? Poutre exhaled 2 smoke rings from his nose and said mockingly, let's put it this way. Baron Limmer is one of the vassals under Count Talon. He collects taxes and responds to calls for enlistment on the latter's behalf. At the same time, the Talon family is a distant relative and supporter of the Jadestar royal family. The exact reason why the villagers here are so poor is because the rulers of the territory are too patriotic and loyal to the kingdom. Thales was silent for a while until Wya interrupted his ruminations. Your Highness, that veteran kept refusing to leave. He is now still following us. Wya pointed towards a limping figure behind them and sighed. We have already passed by Talon family's Ice River City. I reckon that the food and supplies he has are not enough for him to journey back to Eternal Star City. Moreover, he does not have clothing that can ward off the cold. The further we go northwards, in my opinion, we can hand him over to that baron. This way, we do not have to worry about him starving to death or dropping dead on the streets. Cora ran his fingers along his red hair. You saw how he was like. I reckon that the veteran is not good at dealing with nobles. And the baron will probably send him straight into the dungeons. Thales shook his head as he watched Gennard's stubborn figure a distance away. And he was, after all, the late Duke John's personal guard. You can say that he is related to the Jadestar family. Thales' gaze sparkled. He thought of the late king's younger brother in the burial room. Starlight god of war, liberator of Zadra, Duke of Star Lake, John L.K. Jadestar, 613 to 660. Then let's bring him along. Thales looked towards his vice-diplomat in puzzlement. Lord Poutre realized in frustration that the fire in his tobacco pipe had gone out due to the cold again. He fumbled around his pocket in a flurry. Wya sighed, took out a piece of flint and walked forward. In my opinion, to have the willpower to follow us for 3 days and 3 nights on foot, thank you, you are a lifesaver. If he isn't the most loyal follower, he would be the most dangerous enemy. Poutre lit his tobacco pipe and looked towards the end of the carriage fleet, which was where the carriage with coffin was. Scornfully, he said, no matter which one he is, you have a reason to bring him along and place him under your observation and control. There are all sorts of creatures in your disorderly carriage fleet anyway. Thales furrowed his brows, pretending not to have heard Poutre's complaints about having the blood clansmen as travel companions. A loyal follower and a dangerous enemy. I don't feel like risking a bet on any of those 2 possibilities. Poutre sucked in a mouthful of smoke with great force and closed his eyes in satisfaction. It's hard to tell. Sometimes, it is also possible that both apply. Thales rolled his eyes in exasperation. Your Highness, how about that veteran? Wya asked probingly. Thales contemplated for a while. Suddenly, he walked towards the veteran from the Starlight Brigade. Behind him, Ralph quietly followed. Wya was stunned for a moment. He then immediately caught up with the second prince. At the same time, he glanced unhappily at the Phantom Wind follower. After overtaking Ralph, he instinctively took a step forward and became the person closest to the prince. Wya felt that his position as the prince's attendant was seriously threatened by this silver-masked man who could only walk with the help of prosthetics. For example, that sign language that only Ralph and the prince could understand, but not him, even though he was the attendant. Thales shouted from afar, "Veteran, what is your name?" Gennard, who was hugging himself and shivering in the cold, raised his head. Seeing the 9-pointed star embroidered on Thales' clothing, his eyes brightened. He recalled the scene that year, when that lackadaisical, middle-aged duke walked out of the barracks for the first time, and straight towards him. "Duke J. Gennard," he said while shivering. "Still not willing to give up, are you?" Thales narrowed his eyes. "However, you know, it is impossible that I will let you follow us. You were sent here by Zion Covendier, and I do not trust him." Gennard was stunned. He immediately explained, "I am not from the same group as they are. I was captured by them. I don't know why they want to send me here either. But it has been 3 days. Why are you following me?" Thales cut him off and stared straight at Gennard's face. "Give me a reason to believe in you." Gennard stared at Thales in a daze. "True, he is, after all, not the Duke. He won't believe in me." If it was the Duke, he would probably have smiled mysteriously and tapped Gennard's shoulder. In an extravagant manner, he would tell Gennard to collect a serving of food and leave after saying a few words, "I will be watching you." He would then leave, reassured. However, it was precisely because of this personality that the veteran of over 30 years old gritted his teeth and raised his head. "When I was brought here, along the way I heard those people bringing me here saying that you were going to Extit to calm down the fury and hatred of the Northlanders with your own life." Thales stared at him and did not say anything. Gennard hugged himself and said while trembling, "Please let me follow you. Let me follow the 9-pointed star." Thales did not speak. At the point when Gennard was overwhelmed with anxiety, the second prince finally said slowly, "I heard that." Thales exhaled, "You were once from the Starlight Brigade, and was Duke John's, my grand-uncle's personal guard." Gennard's gaze dimmed. "Yes. And I let him down." Thales coldly said, "If it is out of loyalty for Star Brigade's comrade in arms, you may go back to the capital city and continue serving my father, King Kessel." Gennard's face was covered in dust. As he gasped for breath with difficulty, he looked at Thales. "I have served him for 12 years in the capital city, but now, I have nowhere to go." True. That year, when the Starlight Brigade was disbanded, most people followed the captain to Broken Dragon Fortress and had 3 bloody battles with Extinctions. After the garrison contract was signed, they continued guarding the border of Constellation in the bitter cold. But he did not go. He wanted to stay and continue serving the 9-pointed star and the Jadastar family in the capital city, to atone for his sins. But Kessel. Gennard thought of his mind-numbing life in the city defense team, which went on for 12 years. He chuckled forlornly. Seeing his expression, Thales heaved a deep sigh. "Go and look for Cora, the one with the red hair." Under Gennard's surprised gaze, Thales pouted. "Since you are a veteran, ask him to assign a position to you. The diplomat group cannot take in useless people." Shivering, Gennard stared at Thales. The man shuddered violently. 2 streams of tears flowed out uncontrollably from his eyes. Thales was taken aback. This was the type of situation he could not handle the most. He immediately turned and left. This time, Wya followed closely. He did not forget to glance at Ralph, but Ralph was staring at the veteran whose eyes were brimming with tears. "Another lost person, just like me." Thales walked further and further away. If he was John's personal guard, if he participated in those battles, then he must have lived through the truth of the incidents behind the bloody year. Those truths that I want to know, Thales thought. The second prince entered the carriage without saying anything. The carriage fleet continued its journey, exiting Renaissance Avenue and entering the birch tree forest which was unique to the Northern Territory. The next evening, when the carriage fleet with the double cross-shaped stars flag hung on it finally reached the border of the birch tree forest, snow began falling ceaselessly. Everything around them was becoming silvery white. When they stopped to rest, Wya lit a torch from the bonfire started by the guards. He held it close to Thales, who was so cold that he was rubbing his hands. "Please pay attention to the temperature, Your Highness. From now onwards, unlike the capital city, snow not melting will become the norm." "You came here before." Thales gratefully took the warm torch and emitted a hot puff of air. Wya chuckled softly. "I didn't just come here before. The Tower of Eradication is situated in the southwestern direction of the intersection point between Extit and Camu Union, within the mountain range at the northern side of the Great Desert. At that time, the Desert War raged violently. The roads in the western desert were obstructed and I could only make a detour through Extit from the Northern Territory to report for duty." Thales' interest and curiosity was piqued. As he was about to inquire further, Poutre walked towards them. "This year is a little colder than usual. Broken Dragon Fortress will only be colder than this." Lord Poutre scooped up a handful of the thin layer of snow on the ground. His expression became grim. "It is good and bad news at the same time." "How so?" Thales, who did not know much about both the Northern Territory and Extit, humbly asked the vice diplomat who was obviously experienced and knowledgeable, but was always blunt towards him. "The good news is that the day before the bitter cold winter, which is weather exclusive only to the north, will come earlier than usual. No matter how good extichans are at battling during winter, it will be impossible for them to mobilize a large number of soldiers and form any sort of battle formations, or lay siege to the fortress in such weather where water freezes as soon as it is poured out. Their supply line would collapse from the bitter cold. Poutre then said in a contemplative tone, "The bad news is, if Lampod wants to take down Broken Dragon Fortress, these 2 days would be his last chance." A chill ran down Thales' spine. Amid Wya and Ralph's sullen expressions, Poutre rudely snatched Thales' torch and extinguished it in the snow. "Yes, my prince, Broken Dragon Fortress is not far away. If you still intend to prevent the flames of war and not just wander around enjoying the beauty of nature, you'd best hurry up and press onward." At that moment, the cloaked woman and secret protector, Ida, who had been in low spirits all the while, suddenly shuddered violently and sat up. "That there's someone," Ida stuttered while dusting off the snow on her body. But she was immediately cut off. "Enemy attack!" A distance away, a voice yelled loudly and furiously. It was the veteran, Gennard's voice. Thales abruptly stood up. Wya, and Ralph, who was at his side, were even faster than him. One of them drew his sharp blade out of its sheath and the other shielded Thales behind his body. "Cora," Poutre called calmly. "Get into formation." As soon as Cora had furiously ordered, the 30 Jadastar family's private soldiers shouted loudly. Their swords left their sheaths and their shields formed a wall surrounding Thales. They formed the Starlight Formation that was renowned in Constellation. But Thales, pressed between and protected by his attendant and the Phantom Wind follower, looked around in bewilderment at the evening landscape of the birch tree forest. Where are the enemies? In the next moment, he did not have to wonder anymore. Indistinct figures suddenly appeared in a bizarre fashion behind almost every tree around them. There were at least 20. A chill ran down Thales' spine. He had seen people abruptly appear in this manner before. It was like glitching frames in animated movies. As if they were facing a formidable enemy, the private soldiers of the Jadastar family lit torches and passed them to a few key points within the round formation, providing a source of light. The flames illuminated their surroundings. Figures dressed in luxurious clothing and armors, the two unexpectedly appeared at the same time on all their bodies, materialized one by one in the dim forest. There were both men and women, and every single one of them stood with tall, erect postures and were extraordinarily good-looking. However, all of them were staring at Thales and his entourage coldly with sharp, piercing gazes, as if they were looking at prey that would most certainly die. "Who are you?" Poutre shouted calmly as he also whipped out his sword while holding a torch. Under the surprised gazes of the Constellations, a graceful figure slowly walked forward elegantly and quietly. It was a woman. It was the first beautiful woman Thales saw since he transmigrated. She was so beautiful she could steal a person's breath away. How do you say it? She was breathtakingly beautiful. She was wearing a well-tailored, black, formal dress which brought out the shape of her body perfectly. Her face was gentle, she had silvery bright hair, and a pair of endearing purple eyes that seemed as though they were glistening with tears. If placed in Red Street Market, she would definitely be an existence that only high-ranking individuals of a duke's status could meet. This adorable beauty, whose age could not be determined, slowly parted her cherry lips. She, undoubtedly, had an endearing face. But at this moment, she spoke coldly like a robot. "Ladies and gentlemen, good day. I am Katerina Van Corleone. My enemies like to know me as the Weeper." Everyone's breathing suddenly froze. Thales immediately looked behind him towards the carriage with the black coffin in it. He was shocked and bewildered. Corleone, Katerina, the Weeper, isn't that? But everything continued to unfold before him. This beauty in black with an endearing and innocent appearance blinked her watery eyes, but her tone was bone-chillingly cold. Her gaze became harsh, and she pressed her hands on her stomach before she slowly said, "Now, I order you all to hand over my sister. And then all of you will sleep here eternally." Translator's notes. 1. Potemkin village. Derived from a Russian, it is any construction built solely to deceive others into thinking that a situation is better than it really is. The term was originated from stories about a phony settlement built by Grigory Potemkin to impress Empress Catherine II during her journey to Crimea in 1787. Source: Wikipedia. Chapter 86 The Blood Clan's True Form 2. To his surprise, the Blood Clansman found Wya shutting his eyes tightly. Is he waiting for his death already? It seems that there is no way for me to discover his power now. The young attendant sighed quietly. He had only one solution left. Do not always think about the other party's weakness, Wya. That is what the army's commander is supposed to do. His teacher's words echoed in his ears. Wya endured the pain and flipped the single-edged sword in his right hand around to hold it in a reverse grip. What is even more important is to be in control of your strongest forte. Ya's breathing became increasingly stable. Thin wisps of sharp power that were like gossamer gathered around his right arm. His pores were stimulated by this power of eradication, and the hairs on his skin immediately stood on end like sharp needles. No powerful swordsman in history was selfless. They only had their own swords in their eyes. In a split second, the Blood Clansman felt a slight pain in his eyes as he stared at Wya. It was as though his eyes were looking at a sharp sword blade. This is the power of eradication. The facial expression of the Blood Clansman changed. Before his aura takes shape, I have to kill him. Deliver your strongest strike with your sword. This is far more important than victory or defeat, far more important than life or death. His teacher was smiling as she spoke in Ya's memory. Wya was breathing heavily, as if he had practiced tens upon thousands of times in the tower. The power of eradication scraped through his entire body like a blade. He saw it. In the midst of the unbearable pain, he saw the will of the sword being sent forward from his sword. It was delivering a backlash on him. He saw the enemy's killing intent. It was like a ball of flames in the dark, it was so dazzling. He saw it. The Blood Clansman was yelling, rapidly pouncing on him with his sharp claws, which were growing larger exponentially. Go to hell, sword-wielding mortal creature. You will have no chance to use your power of eradication anymore. Wya, understand your power of eradication. No matter how your enemies are like, no matter how strong and powerful your enemy is, pay no attention to victory or defeat, gains or losses. It is a power that wanders around the cliff of insanity. Wya still remembered his teacher sighing at that time. I only need to ensure that I deliver my strongest strike. That will be enough. It also has a name that is not very auspicious. She held up her sword and carved a few words in the air. The Blood Clansman laughed sinisterly and charged towards his side in a split second. It was over. The edge of no return, the teacher said desolately. Wya then swiftly opened his eyes. He had already swung the sword in his hand outwards. There was no return for a sword that had been swung. Its sharpness was unmatched. Rip, asterisk. Blood gushed out. Wya knelt down in pain. The Blood Clansman scratched the clothing on Ya's right shoulder into smithereens, and the pieces of clothing fell onto the floor. The Blood Clansman stared in confusion at his own claw. I did not kill him. Why, did I miss? However, he soon knew the answer to that. The Blood Clansman's whole body was trembling. He carefully looked at his arms and he saw a line of blood appearing on them. No, this is impossible. With my power, it is impossible for him to be able to cut me. Thump, asterisk. The parts below both of his upper arms fell onto the ground. They were sliced cleanly off. The Blood Clansman widened his mouth in shock. This degree of sharpness. He lifted his head up and looked at the single-edged sword. It is obviously just a normal sword. Why? Then, a line of blood appeared across his chest. It was at the same level where his arms were cut off. Thud, asterisk. A blunt noise was heard. His upper body was separated from his torso and it fell to the ground. The cut was flat and smooth. Why, the Blood Clansman thought in despair. He wanted to exhale and shout. However, he could never make a sound anymore. A black heart that distinctively belonged to those of the Blood Clan was separated into two, with one part in the upper body and another in the lower body. The separated heart weakly throbbed twice in both the upper and lower body parts. Then, both parts of the torso along with the Blood Clansman's face, which implied that he did not die without regrets, became black as they shrunk and shriveled. Wya Kaso, who survived the disaster, was gasping for air as he said this to the corpse. I am sorry. I am not the Tower of Eradication's seed, at least, not a seed, in the conventional sense. It was such a close call. His power was actually the power to reverse part of the refraction of light. Wya sighed. No wonder I could not cut him. It was because the parts one aimed for were all parts of the illusion he had created from refraction. It was like a newbie who had located his target, throwing down his spear into the river but still not managing to stab any fishes in it. Shortly after, the sound of footsteps could be heard behind him. Wya clenched his teeth tightly as he vigilantly turned around with his sword in hand. Kutre was seen holding Korra, whose entire body was covered in blood. He was followed by 3 of Jadastar family's private soldiers. They walked out unsteadily from the thicket. Have you seen His Highness? Kutre asked with his brows furrowed together. I have the same question. Wya breathed a sigh of relief as he slowly sat back down. He endured the excruciating pain and used the field survival tips he learned from the tower to stop his bleeding. With much difficulty, he said, "We have to find him immediately. You have to prepare yourself for the worst." The few private soldiers took Korra over. Futre patted the melted snow off of him and fixed his collar. He muttered to himself for a while, and as he was staring at the sunset, he said, "The prince is in a dangerous situation, but we are only left with these people before our eyes." It is evening now. The smoke produced by the alchemy ball was too strong, so we were not able to locate where the prince headed. Korra was struggling when he said, "My lord, just let me down and find his highness. I have a younger sister who works as a secretary at the Western City Police Station. If I die..." "You will not die. At least, you will not die here." Futre cut him off roughly. The experienced vice diplomat of the group pondered slightly, then made his decision. "With our current situation, we cannot do anything while facing this sort of enemy. But fortunately, Broken Dragon Fortress is not far away from here." Our carriages wandered off into different directions due to the explosion, frightening the horses just now. Futre lifted his head up and looked at the three private soldiers. His gaze was firm and persistent. "The three of you separate and move in three different directions. Follow the tracks to find each carriage. Do not hesitate after you find the carriage. If there is a messenger crow, send the messenger crow to Broken Dragon Fortress first with the most urgent Class 7 emergency report. And then, untie the horse, reins. With the fastest speed, ride to the fortress and request for help. For the prince's safety, our first and foremost task is to avoid the vampires if we come across any of them." "Finally ready to reveal all your cards?" Ida smiled indifferently as she twitched her pointy ears. Across from her, Simon gritted his teeth while he took off the coat of his fine attire. He coldly said, "Underestimating the opponent is the first step towards death, let alone an opponent like you, who is an eternal being. Look at the color of your skin." The veins on Simon's face suddenly popped up. "Are you a sacred elf or a white elf? Or could you be a high elf of the Eastern Peninsula?" The veins on his face began to gather together, becoming denser, redder and blacker. Immediately afterwards, Simon's whole frame started to swell up and change shape. He grew 7 or 8 inches taller. His fair skin fell off and turned into ashes, revealing the solid but grayish-black keratin underneath. Simon was roaring in pain, as if he was going through torture. Spurs grew out from both of his shoulders and a pair of dark gray skeletal wings pierced through his back. They then extended into a pair of great wings. Every strand of his hair became thick, hard, and white. Compared to Hested and Chris, Simon's face did not become too sinister or terrifying. Instead, with an extra pair of bat ears, he looked weirdly beautiful. Simon, who transformed into his true form, coldly extended both of his wings and claws. His grayish-white eyes were fixed on Ida. This temporary true form brought forth by origin blood can greatly alleviate a blood clansman's physical attributes. This includes endurance, the ability to recover, ability to regenerate, nimbleness, senses, strength, and even instinctual comprehension towards battle, as well as the special power already held by every blood clansman. Ida sighed. "I just did not expect that it could even make you become more handsome. It is clear just how ugly you were before." Ida finished speaking that moment. Simon's wings vibrated while he was in his true form. With his extraordinary speed that surpassed the perception of almost every other sense, he immediately appeared before the elf. Boom, asterisk. First, there was a loud sound of air being torn apart, which almost had the ability to blow eardrums apart. Tang, asterisk. Then, a loud and sharp noise resounded out of nowhere. A thick, large, but powerful dark gray claw chafed against Ida's blade and sparkles sprayed out fiercely. Ida's figure was sent flying after he struck her with his claw. Due to Simon's incredibly fast movements, the loud sounds of the wind that was stirred up by his movements only arrived much later. The elf flew more than 10 meters away and fell onto the snow-covered ground. She rolled a few times before she hit a tree and stopped. "Speaking nonsense cannot make you stronger." True form Simon spoke with a thicker, hoarser voice as he stared coldly at the elf lying on the ground. Her fate was still unknown. In the next moment, Simon once again moved with extreme speed that triggered sonic booms, and instantly reached the area above Ida to attack her. He flung his claws downwards and stabbed through Ida's body. True form Simon said expressionlessly, "Speed, speed, and also speed. This is my everything, my only power." Before Istrone Corleone rose to supreme class and transformed into his true form, there was no one who could match up to his speed in the entire Night Kingdom. It surpassed the speed of sound. Not even the former King Lori could match his speed. Looking sullen, he raised up his huge claw to lift up Ida's cloak and a section of a branch. However, his expression changed. He realized something. He then immediately turned around and activated his extreme speed, bringing up the loud sounds of the wind in his wake. But at the exact moment he turned around, an exquisite elf machete stabbed straight into the left side of his chest. It seemed as if Simon Hu was the one who moved his chest to the spot in front of the blade. Simon stared in disbelief at the machete that pierced through his heart in his chest. After that, he stared at the pretty and delicate elf beside him. She was bearing quite a large portion of her skin since she was only wearing a set of exquisite crystal drop armor. I do not understand. True form, Simon sighed. There is only one thing that can defeat speed. Ida coldly drew out her machete and turned around in a dashing manner. And that is perfect prediction. Simon knelt down on both of his knees. No, Simon's body returned to normal. He appeared discouraged and defeated. It is impossible. There is no such thing as perfect prediction in this world. Simon stared intently at her. Ida also stared back at him for a really long time. Finally, the elf sighed, admitting defeat in the staring contest. It is very rare that I get a chance to act cool. Do not expose me that fast. Yes, I do not know how to predict at all. The previous time I managed to dodge was not because of how nimble I am either. Ida pouted and said with dissatisfaction, it was due to me being 100% sure of your next move. Simon was alarmed. Next move, 100%, how does she do it? However, he could only fall to the floor weakly with his mouth wide open. Ida pulled back her cloak and her expression suddenly changed. She smacked her forehead, as if she just remembered something. She put on a long face as she furrowed her brows and mumbled, am I still supposed to protect that brat? Patricide. Thales' brain was blank as he stared at Serena. The second prince recalled what she said during their first encounter. My CWY baby whittle sister, Katerina, illegally seized the white I inherited from my father, the Nightwing King. She usurped the Wood Ocean Throne. No, if that is the case. Can someone explain to me what happened? Thales sighed and stared at the pair of blood clan sisters in front of him. He said bitterly, I knew it. The queen of a kingdom would not personally be involved in a dangerous situation and chase after a few political refugees without any reason. More importantly, my so-called ally. Yes, Serena smiled lightly as she cut off his trail of thoughts and waved her hand at Rolana. Rolana casually flung Thales towards the black coffin. Thales painfully crashed onto the stone coffin headfirst. That is not all, my dear Thales, Serena gently said. In front of her, Night Queen Katerina's expression abruptly changed. Serena could be heard enunciating her words clearly with a smile on her face. Her motive of coming here personally is for this coffin. This is the only weapon that can tackle the mystics. A shudder wrecked through Thales' body. Serena could be heard laughing as she said, the legendary anti-mystic equipment. The Dark Knight Black Coffin. Thales was stunned as he stared at the black coffin beneath him. This coffin, that he once climbed into was actually, the only weapon that could attack the mystics. The legendary anti-mystic equipment. However, Serena had yet to finish her speech. She stared at Katerina's murderous gaze and said her next words with a sigh. In this coffin, there is someone imprisoned within its seemingly seamless dark black slab stones, from thousands of years ago. Thales' pupils started to contract as his breathing sped up. Then, Serena spat out the final words, a mystic. Chapter 87. Your blood is quite nutritious. Thales' brain stopped working for 3 seconds before he could think again. Inside this is a mystic. Are you serious? Thales still had fear lingering in his heart when he recalled the air mystic in his human ball. Then he exhaled, fortunately, he is sealed in it. Katerina Corleone looked at Thales' reaction and frowned deeply. Serena, on the other hand, had a smile on her face as she shook her head and licked her lips. You have misunderstood me. Thales lifted his head in confusion. This mystic was not sealed, but imprisoned. Sealing lasts forever. As for imprisonment, Serena stared at Thales' ghastly expression and pointed towards the black coffin beneath him as she chuckled, that mystic can be released at any moment. The moment she finished her speech, Thales lowered his head in disbelief as he stared at the black coffin beneath him. He felt its cold temperature. Release. Soon after, his face was filled with terror. He jumped off as swift as a clap of thunder, like he was sitting on an ejector seat. If Gines was there, she would have probably felt very gratified that her training finally showed results. He urgently leapt off the black coffin and fell onto the snowy ground. He just wanted to be as far away as he could from that black coffin. Are you crazy? Thales yelled at the giggling Serena in anger and confusion. How could you keep something, where a mystic could get out of any time, for a whole month? Serena laughed nonchalantly. This is nothing, the Corleone family has guarded this secret for more than 600 years. Otherwise, why do you think our Night Queen would be willing to travel thousands of miles across the sea and bring along the elite Sacred Blood Army? This was the Corleone family and my father's promise to the Blood Spike Empress that year. It concerns the Corleone family as well as the Night Kingdom's life and death. Thales listened to her speech in a daze. His brain started to work by itself. More than 600 years, this is a suspicious number. Blood Spike Empress, such a familiar title. This is not right. Throughout the peninsula, almost all of the country's leaders have different levels of power from the archdukes to the kings. However, the only people who were known as emperors were those from the ancient empire and the final empire's emperors, correct? Why would there be an empress? Could it be one of the Empire's many emperors from ancient times? It is possible, after all, the Blood Clansman, lifespan. Wait a minute. Thales suddenly quivered. It was not his first time hearing this title. Thales' brain revealed a memory from a long time ago. It was from the scariest enemy he had ever met, the mumblings of the air mystic. Accidents, haha, I am starting to understand Empress Helen's source of strength. The Blood Spike Empress. Empress Helen. Their titles were both Empress. Also, the life and death of the Corleone family. Thales furrowed his brows in deep thought. Right at that very moment, Katerina cut her off with a cold voice, enough. These are all the family's top secrets. They cannot be announced to the public. Serena laughed happily as she pouted at Thales. That is right, but now, he already knows about it. What do we do? Thales felt his skin crawl when he looked at Katerina's purple eyes that had switched to him. Her eyes were pure, sparkling, enchanting, and also, overflowing with murderous intent. It seems like you know what a mystic is, the queen said coldly, how unfortunate. Thales shuddered all of a sudden. Wait, Thales was confused and flustered as he glanced at the smiling Serena. Then, he switched his gaze towards the murderous Katerina. This is bad. Wait, no. The secret must be guarded, Katerina could be heard saying slowly. Thales' brain started to operate at a crazy speed that surpassed his usual thinking rate. The Night Queen stared at him quietly as her right hand started to transform into pure white, sharp claws. Wait a minute, Thales was anxious as he struggled against the ropes that tied his hands. The next moment, Katerina's figure disappeared from his sight. Thales instantly felt the shadow of death looming over his body. Two enormous, pitch-black monsters with huge wings collided face-on into each other. They did not slow down even in the slightest bit before the crash in the air. Bang, asterisk. It felt as if the air shook in that moment. The smaller monster shuddered, he let out a muffled groan, and trembled as he flew backwards. The bigger monster got the upper hand. He utilized his ferocious fist that was covered with spurs and sharp claws. With a ton of force, he struck hard against his opponent's left chest. Blood flew and splattered everywhere. Do you want to compete with me in terms of strength, citizen of the Empire? Hested asked fiercely in his transformed voice. Chris roared angrily as he held onto the wound on his left chest. He flapped his huge wings to rapidly fly backwards. But Hested had no intention of letting him go. Hested's true form was more inclined towards a dark brown color. Compared to his opponent, he was more violent and bigger in size, his spurs and sharp claws were even sharper, and his pitch-black skin was fully covered with a hard, external shell. From afar, he looked like a black warrior covered in full armor. His thick and heavy wings were stirred up strong gusts of wind as he lunged at Chris. True form Chris clenched his sharp teeth tightly against each other and lifted up his arms to block the attack. Rip, asterisk. Sharp claws tore open Chris' right arm. Blood once again gushed out violently. We know each other too well, and we both know how this battle is going to end. Hested roared and bared his sharp teeth while he continued to attack. Every battle we had before the throne always ended in my victory. His claw pierced through Chris' right shoulder. Chris cried out in anger and in pain as black blood oozed out, drenching Hested's palm. Hested flapped his wings and restrained Chris, who was too weak to move. Then both of them fell towards the ground with astonishing momentum. Immediately afterwards, he clenched his right fist and threw a punch forward without holding back. Boom, asterisk. He used his extremely powerful fist and knocked Chris to the ground. Huge cracks appeared on the snowy ground due to the explosion caused by their scary strength. Snow and dust dissipated entirely, after which the sinister figures of the two Blood Clansmen's true form were revealed. The bigger figure was firmly pinning the smaller figure to the ground. The strong Hested used his fist to press against Chris as he coldly said, "See, it's precisely this kind of ending. No one can block my power, and no one can break my armor, it is the perfect balance between attack and defense. How can you even stand a chance?" It seemed like Chris' injuries were extremely serious. His chest caved in due to Hested's brute strength. But surprisingly, his cheeks were still moving, and he gave out a broken smile even though he was dying. "Yes, I still remember the Nightwing King praising your ability. Strength, speed, resistance. The simpler the ability, the deadlier it is." That was what he said. Chris coughed out a mouthful of black blood as he laughed and said, "Battlewing Hested Corleone and Flashwing Simon Corleone respectively led the Sacred Blood Army's shock troops and reconnaissance soldiers. Under their joint hands, they were almost unbeatable in the front lines of the war in the peninsula." The old butler closed his eyes and sneered lightly. Hested's expression slowly changed. "But you were Darkwing Chris Corleone and His Majesty's most trusted military counselor as well as assistant. Do you remember that?" Hested's expression turned cold as he cut off the old butler. "Along with the logistics official Red Wing Lee Corleone, we were the Night King's fearsome four wings. Our name intimidated every country in the Eastern Peninsula." Hested clenched his teeth and trembled as he looked at Chris. His eyes were filled with hatred. 300 years ago, we were His Majesty's strongest wings. We followed him over the Sea of Eradication and went on an expedition on the other side of the world. During that era, we owned the Sea of Eradication's East Bank and 20% of Eternal Oil's rations, as well as 15% of the Eastern Peninsula's Crystal Drop ore. Grand Banquet Hill's 5 clans would send in letters every single month in hopes to maintain their status and join the Nightwing King's troops. Even Wild Vast Mountain's Silver Wolves, Cell Prairie's Red Wolves, Desert, Glacier, and also Black Mountain's 3 Great Orc tribes, would all send someone to express their sincerity towards His Majesty. Chris sighed sadly when he heard these things, whereas Hested clenched his teeth. His sinister face was filled with an eerie coldness. During the Peninsular War, even the two extremes of the Eastern Peninsula, Maynard Knox dynasty and Handball, did not recklessly overlook Night Kingdom and how powerful His Majesty was. They looked upon him as the supreme commander of the allied armies while they curried his favor and fear. We once worked as one and crushed Extit's main forces along with their pride into pieces at Arun Castle. His Majesty personally took the King of Wrath's head. Back in the day, we tore the dwarfs' armors apart and turned their weapons into scrap metal. We also trapped the Sacred Tree Kingdom's elf army in Beacon Illumination City. At Arun Castle, we killed all of the reinforcements from Constellation and Camus until not a single one of them was left. Chris, whose chest had caved in from the strike earlier, was strenuously gasping for air as he closed his eyes tightly. At Prestige Orchid Snowland, all of us gathered behind His Majesty's flag, with Chara, Kaplan and also Midir, the 3 most outstanding heroes of the Western Peninsula, or even the entire human history. We launched the world's most magnificent battle, the final battle of historical poetry after the Battle of Eradication. From the Battle of Eradication, the start of that hellish battlefield, until the eve of the Fourth Peninsular War, we had always fought together with His Majesty, for an entire 400 years. Chris lowered his head and sighed. Hested's red pupils were flaming with rage and hatred. But you damned citizen of the Empire, you betrayed the Corleone family after His Majesty's death. How dare you? Chris Corleone. Without His Majesty granting you your rebirth, your last name, and your power, you would have only been a small lieutenant general of the final empire. You would be waiting for your death with your eyes closed in a pile of dead people. Chris Tamil Linka. Without His Majesty, you are nothing. How dare you betray him and surrender to the murderer who killed His Majesty? How dare you? The 2 sinister blood clansmen in their true forms were panting harshly as they remained silent for a while. At this moment, Chris, who was lying on the ground, suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood and he involuntarily laughed. Ah, since you mentioned the tyrant, there is one point that you still do not know. Chris licked the blood at the corner of his lips and lifted up his pitch-black head. His expression was full of derision. Do you know why the Nightwing King always yelled, "Stop," when you got the upper hand every time we fought? Hested brought his opponent closer to his sinister face and laughed. His Majesty feared that a loser like you would be crushed by my fist. No, Chris' expression became solemn. He was afraid that if we continued fighting, you would be killed by me. Hested was momentarily stunned. He then opened his bloody mouth and laughed loudly with his abnormally robust true-form voice. Kill me, how? With your special corrosive power. He lifted up his palm that was covered with Chris blood. Your strongly acidic blood is very effective in dealing with others. But unfortunately, it can never corrode my true-form armor. This is an absolute foolproof defense. Chris was restrained by Hested. He did not reply and only laughed. A cold chill suddenly ran down Hested's spine. What is going on? What cards does he have in his hands exactly? Nonetheless, Hested still clenched his fist and aimed at Chris' head. A few hundred years of army life made Hested Corleone decide not to hesitate over his old affection towards his comrade. He was prepared to completely take Chris' life. How long was 0.1 seconds? Thales would tell you that it was long enough for him to close his eyes and roar one single word. And so, the moment when Katerina, whose killing intent was clear and obvious, disappeared, the transmigrator closed his eyes and yelled, "Covendier." Wind rushed by his face. Thales squeezed his eyes shut as breathed harshly. Ha, ha. He opened his eyes a little. Katerina's black and scary sharp claws could be seen an inch away from his face. What did you say? Katerina narrowed her enchanting, beautiful eyes as she slowly spoke. I managed to escape from this disaster. Thales was panting uncontrollably as he asked in nervousness, was it Covendier? Was it Zion Covendier who told you the news that Serena was in the fleet of carriages? You know quite a lot. Katerina snorted lightly as she spread out her sharp claws. In that case, you should be dead even more. Thales saw his own life flash before his eyes and he felt his skin crawl. He could not manage to care about his intonation as he immediately blurted out the words he had just finished thinking about. He did so in one breath, fluently, and without any pauses in between. Surely he did not tell you that this fleet is actually an important diplomat group from Constellation. This fleet is heading to Exted and within this group there is Constellation's only heir. After you kill me you will get yourself into a huge pile of problems, am I right? After Thales finished blurting out these words in one single breath, he continued to pant. He was drenched in sweat as he collapsed and sat down. Katerina widened her purple eyes, implying that she was shaken. Jadestar royal family, heir, was it not? 12 years ago, she mumbled to herself, but immediately figured out something. The Night Queen slowly retracted her sharp claws. Clap, asterisk. Clap, asterisk. Clap, asterisk. A round of applause could be heard beside them. As expected of my ally, Serena, who had been watching for a long time, was clapping with enthusiasm. She was smiling happily. However, Prince Thales, how are you so sure that she is not specifically here to kill you? Katerina's eyes once again became solemn as she turned to the young-looking Serena. In order to ensure my safety, from the second day of the journey onwards, I no longer wore the 9-pointed star insignia or emblem. Oh, by the way, you can find a 9-pointed star brooch in the left pocket of my shirt. Thales sighed. Katerina took out the brooch from his pocket and immediately furrowed her brows together. As for this, Queen, she never revealed any intention of killing somebody. What she said was, kill them all. Even the start of the war was incited by you, Serena. Thales smiled bitterly as he said, I just figured it out, all 20 of you, a team of elites with supreme abilities, whose identities are considered sensitive information, traveled across the sea to be here. Without local forces and support, how could you easily get across the border? The only Constellation noble who has connections with the Corleone family and is able to provide ships that belong in the family can only be the Covendiers. Katerina slowly exhaled when she listened to his words. She looked at the 9-pointed star brooch in her hand with her icy gaze. Damn you, Covendier. The friendship between the Corleone and Covendier family, blood fangs and tricolor iris flowers ends here, she slowly said. Thales finally breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed like his life was temporarily secured before this strong and powerful queen. Katerina held the brooch tightly in her palm and muttered, the people from the Covendier family only told us that the traitor of the Corleone family was currently in the carriage fleet up north. They only said that it was Constellation's supply transportation fleet to the Northern Territory, but never mentioned that it was the second prince's diplomat group. It seemed like they did this on purpose. After we got off the ship, we stayed in their encampment the entire time. We do not even know that Constellation has gotten a new heir. Thales' expression changed as he said angrily, that was such a huge matter that the whole of Constellation knew about it, down to the very last detail. Why did you not check and confirm the matter on your own? However, Katerina did not reply him. She just turned her head sideways and moved her gaze away from him. Thales was confused for a moment. She seems a bit embarrassed. They have no way to confirm this. Serena was laughing beside them. Katerina's forces and supporters were all in the Sacred Blood Army. She is 100% a military queen. Chris was in charge of the Corleone family and Covendier's interactions, the spies in the Western Peninsula as well as communication channels in the Western Peninsula, but, when he suddenly betrayed her and switched to my side. Under Katerina's grim expression, Serena spread her hands happily. Katerina became blind and deaf to every bit of information about Constellation. Thales suddenly came to a realization. That was why you chose to take refuge in Constellation. He immediately thought of something as he turned towards Katerina. Queen Katerina, he used honorifics as he spoke. Zion, I am referring to Duke Covendier. When did he reveal Serena's whereabouts to you? Katerina stared coldly at him. After a while, she opened her mouth and said, we just reached the Western Peninsula more than a week ago and went into Eternal Star City 6 days ago. Covendier informed us that he found traces of Corleone's traitor at noon 4 days ago. Katerina's face was clouded with gloom, but her appearance that would provoke tender affection from people made her look like an adorable beauty who was currently sulking. Their proviso was, in order to not leak any information and thereby tarnish Iris Flower's reputation. We had to kill everyone who traveled alongside Serena. We had to ensure that not a single person was kept alive, whether they be children or the elderly. Serena's whole frame shuddered. If I had known earlier that you made this promise, I would not have gone through such trouble. However, she immediately came to a realization. But then, if that supreme class woman is here, you would probably have no way to kill him either. Thales lowered his head and sighed. When did the Duke of Iris Flowers begin to have a desire to kill him? Even if he acted at this point and was able to draw a clear line with the Corleone family after this incident, he would still leave some traces behind. This would cause more troubles in the future, would it not? Zion, why did he make this clearly stupid decision? After he tried getting answers from me with a few words during the morning we met, his attitude suddenly became extremely odd. Now that I think about it, he was trying to find Serena's whereabouts. Also, he brought along. Thales' eyes lit up. It is that old soldier, right? Thales lifted his head and slowly asked. Probably, without his knowledge, some sort of tracking device had been planted on him. You do not need to chase after our fleet because Zion knew that Jannard would do his very best to follow me. As for you, you only had to follow this old soldier. You were very far away from me, so no matter how many scouts and sentries my soldiers arranged, they still could not sense your presence. So long as you kept away from the central territory and the suzerain of the fortress, whom you could possibly run into every few days, and enter the desolate birch forest, Thales sighed as he concluded, you could start attacking. Katerina's eyes lit up. For a mortal creature, you are very intelligent, and you have quick response, especially for a mortal creature your age. Right, I thought so too. Serena was beaming when she cut into the conversation. However, Katerina and Thales glared at her with an angry gaze at the same time. Serena shrugged helplessly and revealed her tiny fangs. All right, since I did not accomplish my goal, I have to take matters into my own hands. The next moment, Serena's small hands transformed into red sharp claws as she bared her fangs and pounced on Thales swiftly. Thales shuddered, but both of his hands were tied, so he could only kick the snowy ground with all of his strength to move backwards. Dong, asterisk. The snow exploded and scattered into the air. The frosty cold snow crashed into Thales' face, and the prickly sensation made him shut his eyes. Thales opened his eyes and saw that Serena's tiny red claws were just a few feet away in front of him. But this time, she was held back tightly by Katerina. Since just now, you were making every possible effort to lure me into killing him, Katerina said coldly, do you still have the delusion of seizing the throne in your heart even though you are already in such a situation? The tiny Serena grinned. What, can I not do so? I am the number one candidate to inherit the throne compared to you, number two. I am still a place above you. Very well, Katerina raised her other hand and said dryly, since I already do not have any hopes of catching you alive anymore. I should directly change my rank into number one, Katerina shouted furiously, and her sharp claws went straight for Serena's heart. As for Rolana, who was standing beside Serena, she was staring coldly at the situation. There was no sign showing that she intended to interfere with things. Nonetheless, at the very next moment, an incident that made Thales extremely shocked and confused happened. The torso of the young-looking Serena torso visibly inflated as if she had suddenly grown up and all of her clothing tore apart. She transformed into a curvy and sensual-looking, coquettishly beautiful woman. She was almost as tall as Katerina. Her red eyes and silver hair were incomparably enticing. At this moment, this coquettish beauty had an enchanting smile on her face. She held onto Katerina's pure white sharp claws effortlessly. Katerina bared her fangs and roared angrily as she thrust her other set of claws towards Serena. However, it was as if the coquettish beauty had also predicted her attack, and Serena held onto Katerina's hand tightly. Your strength is still so weak, crybaby. The coquettish beauty was shaking with laughter like a sprig with trembling blossoms. Thales was suddenly jolted. Ugly-faced woman, Katerina said with her voice filled with anger and hatred, you natural-born deceiver. When did you recover your actual strength? Thales looked at the coquettish beauty with red eyes and silver hair as he cried out in surprise. This is impossible, you only sucked my blood twice. Under Katerina's solemn gaze, the grown-up version of Serena, who was naked and showed no signs of embarrassment, blinked her bewitching eyes and gave him an alluring smile. Oh, about that, your blood is quite nutritious. Chapter 88 Awakening 1. Supreme class battles do not have sluggish rhythms and scattered force like superclass and ordinary class battles. More often than not, superclass battles and ordinary class battles would look terrifying, but in reality, they would waste a large amount of their strength and stamina. In contrast, almost everyone in supreme class were fearsome existences who had full control over their powers and can use them flexibly in any way they wanted. Therefore, battles between them were often timed to perfection, simple, and straightforward. Time and effort were saved, and these battles were also highly efficient and very fatal. For them, if one party slipped up even slightly in terms of control, it was very common for the other party to reverse the situation and gain the upper hand in the blink of an eye. Like now. Hested expressionlessly pressed Chris onto the ground. His right claws were tightly clenched, and his strength slowly increased along with the contraction of his terrifying true-form muscles. It was aimed towards Chris' hideous head. Chris laughed softly. Old friend, whether I am fighting by your side, or as your enemy, both of them would be my honor, Hested said plainly. In the next moment, he threw a punch with tremendous force. Unstoppable. It only took 0.5 seconds from the time the punch fell from the air to the time it touched the tip of Chris' nose. Within these 0.5 seconds, Chris abruptly revealed his fangs and he roared furiously. The skeletal wings on his back shot out from the snow-covered ground. The sharp thorns on the tip of the wings went straight for Hested's eyes. It was a futile struggle. Hested, having experienced many battles, snorted lightly in his heart. With his most familiar battle instincts, he quickly twisted his strong body, then relaxed his left hand which was restraining Chris, and his right fist continued traveling downwards. Chris seized the moment when Hested relaxed his left hand to pound his fists on the ground. His heavily injured body shot up and charged back towards Hested. Hested's horrifying right fist grazed past Chris' hideous left cheek and left ear. The strong breeze mercilessly shaved off skin and flesh, shaving off a piece of horrendous, black flesh and blood. Boom, asterisk. Hested's fist landed on the ground. Snow flew everywhere. The heavily injured Chris had half his face scraped off. Howling, he used the force provided as he charged backwards, and bent his arm to use his elbows to hit Hested's armored chest with all his strength. Hested calmly watched his old friend's counterattack. He blocked Chris' arms with his chest. The muscles on his waist and legs flexed while his skeletal wings spread open to maintain his balance. He absorbed part of the impact and shifted another part of the impact to other parts of his body. He managed to negate Chris' attack after sliding backwards on the snow-covered ground for only 2 inches. Chris flapped his bony wings frantically, but he could no longer make Hested move back at all. The struggles of a trapped beast, the huge Hested said coldly. Before Chris could react, Hested roared furiously. Clenching both his claws, he suddenly exerted force towards the middle of his arms. Chris' head was planted on Hested's chest. Hested's powerful fists, which possessed astonishing momentum, went straight towards Chris' head from both sides. Chris reacted extremely quickly by immediately extending his elbows upwards and blocking Hested's arms. With a burst of strength, he moved his head before Hested's fists could touch his head. Under Chris' interference, Hested's fists missed the latter's head by a few millimeters. The pair of fists with spurs on them crashed into each other 2 inches behind Chris' head. Boom! Asterisk. The huge, explosive sound even made Chris, who had just avoided disaster, deaf for a second. Fortunately, he had the powerful regenerative abilities of blood clansmen who were in their true form. In the blink of an eye, his body adjusted its blood flow and concentrated in his brain, healing his damaged ears. However, the battle had yet to end. Hested did not care at all that he had missed an opportunity to kill his opponent. He immediately pulled back his arms, restraining Chris to his bosom. "Do you prefer to die like this?" Hested asked coldly. In the blink of an eye, the muscles in his arms contracted with great strength. His terrifying arms bound Chris' upper body tightly, restraining him tighter and tighter. "After I shatter the bones in your entire body, I will mercifully dig your heart out." Snap, snap, asterisk. The sound of bones snapping inch by inch resounded. Chris howled in pain, but he could not free himself from Hested's deadly embrace. Hested laughed out loud and hugged Chris tightly, as if he was embracing a battle companion. Just like how they embraced each other without any ill feelings after achieving victory in an arduous battle when they were younger. However, the glorious past had disappeared without a trace forever. Snap, Chris' bones were still fragmenting piece by piece. "Before you die, beg for forgiveness from His Majesty." Hested's arms drew tighter and tighter. At this moment, Chris, who was in extreme pain, shot him a smile with great difficulty. "Time is up," he said in pain. Hested was stunned. What time? He did not want to waste time. He prepared to continue exerting force with his arms, intending to squash Chris into pieces in his bosom. But then, Hested realized in shock that the force of his arms was becoming weaker and weaker. "What's going on? Why is my energy disappearing?" Hested started to lose feeling in his arms. He furrowed his brows tightly and released Chris without hesitation. In the next moment, Hested stared at his arms, his eyes were filled with disbelief and shock. Impossible. For some unknown reason, half of his arms had been corroded by Chris' black blood. There was no other reason to it. True form armor, it is completely impossible for it to be corroded. Hested gritted his teeth hard, wanting to comprehend this impossible scene. Had a few hundred years of battles not proven this point? Chris panted on the ground with great difficulty, smiled wanly, and said, "Haha, unstoppable strength, unbreakable defenses. Have you heard of the Far Eastern story about the spear and the shield?" Hested took a step back in shock. What? When did he? His arms were still corroding continuously. Swaying, Chris stood up. "Your fists are sharp weapons. They also have hard armor that can withstand impact. They are sharp and hard at the same time, amplified by your strength which is comparable to that of a great dragon. Your terrifying battle instincts, and incomparable mastery of force, you are indeed. However, when they are pitted against each other, what would happen?" With an unpleasant expression, Hested hammered Chris back to the ground with his head. "No, no." However, Chris stood up again, swaying. He smiled and said, "At the moment your fists crashed into each other behind my head, a slight crack that even you did not expect appeared. Maybe, after this battle, they would repair themselves. But for my blood, this slight crack is enough for it to seep into that true form armor of yours that is supposedly unbreakable, and corrode the completely vulnerable blood and flesh within." Arduously, Chris held on to Hested's arms. The black blood on half of Hested's arms immediately flowed through him at an increased speed. It rapidly seeped from Hested's wounds to the insides of his body. Hested gritted his teeth and moved his body. The corrosion from the black blood had already reached deep inside him. "This is the end to our battle, my fellow clansmen." Chris coughed out a mouthful of blood, smiled wanly and said, "To battle with you, it is an honor indeed." Hested could not support his body anymore. Lying on the ground with indignation, he raised his head towards the sky and roared furiously. Ellipsis. "Can you not see it yet?" Katerina said coldly, "There has never been any human blood that is so nourishing. She was probably in good condition since the beginning. This woman is a born performer. You were deceived by her from the beginning to the end. Just like how she deceived everyone in the Corleone family. Thales looked at the adult version of Serena in a daze. Could it be that she was never heavily injured? So, her form as a little girl, the so-called alliance with me. When did she start? When she first arrived at Mindy's Hall. Morat's visit, Vine Manor. It cannot be, then, our alliance. However, the fatal battle between the Blood Clan sisters, where they would use all attacks at their disposal, had already begun. Do not dream of changing into your true form. Serena, whose strength was obviously superior, disregarded her younger sister's hands that were gripping her wrists. She abruptly seized Katerina's neck and sank her claws into her flesh. She smiled and said, just like in the past, you have no chance. Ugly-faced woman, Katerina said with disdain. Serena's expression changed. She whistled towards the back. The trial of strength between Katerina and Serena finally had a result. It was because the super-class Blood Clanswoman, Rolana, who was watching the battle from the side, appeared behind Katerina in the blink of an eye and thrust her claws outwards. Shrieking, Katerina moved her head and dodged the attack, but the claws still pierced a hole in her shoulder. Serena grabbed tightly onto the wounded Katerina. Both of them disappeared from the spot at the same time, and then appeared not far away in the air, crashing hard into two birch trees and breaking them. Bang! Asterisk. The snow dispersed completely, revealing Serena's naked figure. She laughed softly and said, how is the feeling of being continuously attacked and not being able to change into your true form? With a chilly expression, Rolana appeared beside the two sisters and tightly held Katerina in place. Serena laughed maniacally. Facing the obviously restrained Katerina, she thrust her fist out so fast that it stirred up a breeze, and she punched her younger sister's face. Boom! Asterisk. Katerina spat out a mouthful of blood and her head was flung powerlessly to the side. Thales cursed loudly. It was obvious that the attitude of Serena's party towards him was no longer one of alliance, like it used to be. Based on the situation right now, the Night Queen was his only hope. Boom! Serena's second punch landed on the Night Queen's face. Do you miss this, Cat? Serena smiled happily, and aimed for Katerina's soft and sweet face. An older sister's love. Katerina's gaze brightened. She turned, and with a speed that could not be seen by the naked eye, as well as sharp claws aimed at a sharp angle, she slashed Rolana behind her with ease. She even inflicted a wound that was so deep the bones beneath were visible on Rolana's chest. However, she did not have the time to attend to Serena, who was in front of her. The patricide threw another punch. Boom! Asterisk. This is the third punch with larger force. It pushed Katerina onto the snow-covered ground. Thales anxiously watched the battle. At the same time, he searched through the carriage's remnants for something that can be used to cut the rope. However, with his eyesight, he could not grasp the Blood Clanswomen's fearsome and extreme speed. He could only see a sight where the three of them looked like as if they were experiencing frame skips. It was not that he had not contemplated escaping while the chaos went on, but he knew that on the snow-covered ground in the evening, he would not be able to escape the Blood Clanswomen's pursuit and attack by only relying on his short and tiny legs, no matter which party it was. Rolana climbed up from the ground and roared. On the other hand, Serena went forward while laughing shrewdly. But in the next moment, a strange sound rang from where Katerina was. Whimper, ah. Serena's expression changed drastically. Whimper, ah. Having heard that sound, Thales suddenly felt his whole body tremble. He could not help but feel that the entire world had been turned upside down. Ah. Whimper. He could not even maintain his balance while sitting on the floor. Swaying, he fell down. He could not stand up anymore. Thales panicked. What is going on? Whimper, whimper. Thales moved laboriously, but his consciousness was clouded, as if he had lost all sense of direction. When he extended his hand towards the left, it ended up being extended to the right. When he raised his head up towards the sky, it went even deeper into the snow-covered ground. After wriggling about randomly, he finally shifted his gaze towards the battlefield. He shifted his eyes towards Katerina. Her purple eyes had currently become pure black and an unknown black liquid seeped out of her eyes without stopping. Beside her, Rolana fell onto the ground as if she was drunk, just like Thales. She was cursing out loud with gritted teeth. Thales' heart jolted, as Katerina, crying. He immediately thought of Katerina's nickname, the Weeper. So, is this her ability? With black liquid flowing out of her eyes, Katerina emitted a strange and mysterious sobbing noise. She slowly stood up and looked at her older sister. Tears of the Bloody Night. With her body swaying, Serena spoke resentfully, who would have thought that it can be used without the true form. Amid these strange cries, Serena kept herself going with much effort, intending to punch through her younger sister's chest before collapsing. Slap, asterisk. Thales saw in astonishment that Serena's fist was clamped tightly by sharp white claws that had spurs growing on them. Serena furrowed her brows. Katerina, who was restrained all along, raised her swiftly transforming head. Her ears became longer, her fangs became sharper, and parts of her bones jutted out of her face. Her entire face gained a strange, pale white color. Thales watched in a daze as Katerina's entire body expanded, changed shape, and had white skeletal wings grow out of it. She slowly transformed into a massive, white monster. The true form, exclusive to supreme class members of the Blood clan. Bang! Asterisk. Amid Serena's shrill cries, her sister had already punched a hole through her stomach. Whimper, yes, whimper, my elder sister, whimper. Katerina, who was in her white true form, had her pure black eyes open. She spoke with a hoarse voice, your younger sister, loves you very much, too, whimper. Serena shrieked and frantically shook her body, but within Katerina's strange cries, she was powerless. Whimper, it seems that you did not recover well, my elder sister, whimper. At this moment, Katerina looked like she was sobbing and talking at the same time. It appeared especially terrifying. In contrast, whimper, I have improved too much. Whimper, right now, I, whimper, do not even have to change into my true form to use Tears of the Bloody Night. Whimper, this forbidden ability is truly one that attacks without differentiation between friend and foe. While using her alleged Tears of the Bloody Night, Katerina raised her fist that had pierced through Serena's stomach and dragged Serena in front of her. She displayed an expression that looked like she was both crying and smiling. Thales shut his eyes in relief. Does this count as executing a major attack in time? This change in this situation is truly scary. Katerina's skeletal wings slowly extended and unfurled. The skin and flesh on her body began to fall off. Soon, she would completely change into a pure white, true form, Blood clanswoman. However, now, Rolana, Serena said, barely alive. Katerina furrowed her brows. It appeared that Rolana, who was lying on the ground, had adapted to that feeling of having lost her sense of direction and balance. She hugged her arms hard around Katerina, who was still transforming. Rolana flashed a charming smile that immediately became a bitter, wan smile. Your Majesty, I'm sorry, but this is for freedom. Thales felt an ominous presentiment. Boom, asterisk. The next moment, Rolana's entire body exploded and dispersed into black blood that filled the whole sky, but splashing onto a small area. It drenched the still transforming Katerina and the heavily injured Serena entirely. Both of them raised their arms to cover their faces, blocking off the black blood that showered from the sky. A mere few seconds passed, the strange cries stopped abruptly, and was replaced by Katerina's shriek. This is, she raised her trembling hands. Staring at the black blood on them, she roared miserably in disbelief, filthy blood poison. Katerina appeared as though she was splashed with the sulfuric acid which existed in Thales' past life. Under that black blood, her entire body trembled, and her true form started shrinking. Without the effect of Tears of the Bloody Night, Thales sat up and watched this scene in a daze. What is this? At that moment, Serena pressed the wound on her stomach hard and let out a sincere, wild laugh that filled the whole sky. Ha 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 ha. The next moment, the skin and flesh on her body fell off inch by inch. A blood-red layer of keratin grew and took shape. Her ears became long and her skeletal wings pierced through her back. Spurs and sharp claws eventually took shape. In the blink of an eye, Serena changed into a massive, blood-red monster. Apart from the color, she looked almost exactly like Katerina. There was only one small difference. Unlike Katerina's facial features, which were still pure after changing into her true form. Serena's facial features. Trembling, Thales remembered the scene that he did not want to recall the most. A large, black mouth which extended to the back of her ears. A pitch-dark nose which is completely devoid of anything. Eyes that were like two irregular black holes. This is, apart from the fact that the skin was no longer scorched black and withered. This was basically the terrifying mummy version of Serena Thales saw that night in the black coffin at Vine Manor. Drenched in cold sweat, Thales watched the scene. He suddenly understood what Katerina meant when she called Serena an ugly-faced woman. Truly, she's really ugly. Serena, who had an inelegant true form, opened her massive mouth and revealed fangs that were equally irregular. As though having her prey in her grasp, she let out a savage snarl at Katerina. Roar. Ka-boom, asterisk. Amid the true form Serena's hoarse cackles and Katerina's screech, the Night Queen's wings were snapped. Tear, asterisk. The next moment, Katerina's left arm was torn to pieces. Blood splattered everywhere. Rip, asterisk. This time, her right arm was effortlessly snapped off. Katerina, who had lost both her arms and both her wings, howled maniacally. However, true form Serena only flashed a victorious smile and struck her onto the snow-covered ground with a punch. Boom, asterisk. The terrifying true form Serena raised her sharp, red claws, that were at least double the length of those of a normal blood clansman, and fervently swung them downwards. Tear, asterisk. She chopped off both of Katerina's legs. Katerina's true form finally disappeared completely, resuming her form of that endearing-looking queen in black. However, she was already too powerless to turn the tables. Thales watched this reversal of the situation in a daze. This is bad, he thought, very bad. Katerina, whose 4 limbs were broken and wings shattered, spat a mouthful of blood in indignation. She watched as the true form Serena slowly changed back into her normal appearance. The true forms of supreme class members of the Blood clan are terrifying, Serena said happily and seductively to her younger sister who was lying on the ground in an extremely pitiful state. However, very few people know that the process of changing from our normal states and into our true forms is a process where we transform our body's tissues, change our blood, and become reborn. Serena picked up the cape Rolana left behind after sacrificing herself, and wrapped it around her own body. She sat beside her younger sister and made a pretense of sighing. This is the time when the immunity of blood clansmen towards special toxins is at its weakest, especially if there is blood clansmen from the same family and the same source, who voluntarily dissolves the filthy blood poison into her own body and lets you absorb it while you are changing forms. Is this not a brilliant idea? You know, your so-called forbidden ability had always given me a headache. Thales found a sharp wooden fragment and desperately sliced at the rope that tied his hands behind his back. However, this was totally not as easy as depicted in the television movies from his past life. He could not see the situation behind his back, nor know what the most effective way to slice through the ropes was. He was also unable to exert force. I must be a little quicker. Or else, after Katerina, it would be my turn. What should I do? Gritting his teeth, Thales contemplated frantically. Katerina, who was powerless to fight back, resentfully said, "Crazy B***tch. Using your subordinate's life do you know how painful it is for someone to absorb poisonous blood into their body? Ha ha ha, I like to see this adorable manner of yours the most, where you can only retort with foolish words after the situation is reversed at a crucial moment." Serena clapped happily and laughed loudly, "Seeing how powerful I am, the Nightwing King would probably be very gratified, don't you think so?" "Shut up," the Night Queen, who had lost all advantages, cried hoarsely in indignation and resentment, "You have no right to mention him. You murdered our father, patricide." "Father?" Serena suddenly turned her head, and her face was shrouded in a chilly look that seemed to have no end. "You call him father, just because he bit your neck?" On the ground, Katerina was suddenly stunned, as if she was hit on her weak spot. She then immediately retorted in a frenzy, "He rescued us and raised us." Katerina, whose 4 limbs were broken, was filled with hatred. She struggled to raise her head and glare at her sister. "He gifted us with his most valuable origin blood, allowing us to possess his bloodline, share his glory, and even inherit his title. He loved us like how a real father would. Otherwise, the 2 of us mere orphans would have died a violent death during those turbulent days of the Battle of Eradication." Thales shuddered violently. "Battle of Eradication?" Serena moved in a flash. She seized the latter's neck and raised her up. Filled with disgust and derision, the patricide spoke coldly to her younger sister, "My naive younger sister, you do not know anything. You only remember the human-shaped doll that he gave you, only remember the love he gave you, don't you, cat? You will always be nothing but a crybaby who hides behind me. Did you think that I do not know what you were thinking? Your thoughts towards him?" Katerina's gaze seemed as if it was frozen by something. She watched her elder sister with a gaze full of suspicion. Serena coldly said, "Every time that man returns to the palace, you were that idiot who was the first one to rush to him, and you would act in a pettishly charming manner. If any simple-minded female servant or dame showed slight affection towards him, you would taunt and jeer at them, secretly oppress them, and make the servants isolate them. The weeper, half of your tears are shed because you are afraid of me, and the other half are shed because you like him." Katerina trembled abruptly. "Yes, I know," Serena said while smiling mockingly, "Cat, you not only admired and idolized him." Struggling, Katerina put on a disbelieving expression. Under Thales' astonished gaze, the patricide spoke, enunciating each word, "You also liked him and desired him. You loved him deeply." Katerina stared at Serena while trembling. She was lost for words. At this moment, Serena laughed deeply, mysteriously, and insanely. "You fell in love with the person who gave you a second chance at life, fell in love with the powerful Nightwing King. Am I right?" "No." Katerina's brows moved to show her struggle, as if she was immersed in disbelief and pain. "Is that not so?" Serena said coldly, "You wished that you were his wife or his lover, instead of his daughter." As Thales watched this scene, he was taken aback. "This is severe, electrocomplex." Thales lowered his head and sighed. And yet, his fate depended on this queen. Struggling, he stood up. "Damn, why'd I, every time, in the end, have to save the world, by myself?" The heavily injured Katerina started to roar hysterically. "In this ugly and shameless feeling of yours," Serena's gaze became cold. She extended her blood-red claws and softly grazed it past Katerina's fair face. "Let it end now." Suddenly. "Wait." Serena furrowed her brows slightly and turned her head to look towards Thales. Thales was leaning against the carriage wreckage. He struggled up from the ground and with brows tightly furrowed, looked at the hideous Serena. Under Serena's gaze, he walked towards the black coffin. The legendary anti-mystic equipment, the Dark Knight Black Coffin. "I heard that there is a mystic inside here." Panting, Thales' jade star flashed a bitter smile. "He is even the type that can be let out. Do you want to meet him?" Chapter 89 Awakening 2. Tower of Eradication, House of Science, Truth Library. This was an enormous storeroom. Red rays of sunset pierced through the dome roof made of crystal drops, and shone upon rows of large bookshelves, making the record books made of various, colored materials glisten. Can you be a little more serious? A lean and handsome middle-aged man with short, gray hair held an everlasting lamp and stood behind a row of huge bookshelves, staring in dissatisfaction at the other side of the bookshelf. There was a sickly, blond young man who sat leaning against a bookshelf. The Class 2 police officer of Eternal Star City, Cohen Karabayan, raised his head with a fatigued expression and looked at his teacher, Zedai Tafner. So tired that he was barely alive, the police officer raised his hand and said, "Hey. I asked someone to help me take a month's leave and took 7 days to travel without pause to the Tower of Eradication. Then you pulled me here before I could even catch up on some sleep. I only ate 2 pieces of bread during all this." Cohen weakly patted his stomach and protested feebly, "Can you at least show some concern for your students' welfare?" His middle-aged teacher, Zedai Tafner, snorted and put down the everlasting lamp. He nonchalantly took another book. "It was you who voiced your desire to read records on science for reference. You know that Xiao wouldn't agree. That old Far Easterner sticks obstinately to the rules. I can only make the best use of the time when he is not around to come here with you." Remembering Master Xiao's temper, Cohen leaned against the bookshelf behind him. He felt that he could not arouse any interest to look for books at all. He spoke in resignation. "Xiao, did he not give up the inheritance right to the greatest sword sect in the Far East to come to the Tower of Eradication? I thought that, having done something like that, he would not be so conservative and rigid." "How would I know? All of Xiao's inheritance have all sorts of weird regulations. Anyway, until now, I have not figured out the operation protocols of those sects of theirs. If we were members of Far Eastern sword sects, as a student, the moment you walk through the door, you should respectfully kowtow to me. If you are disrespectful towards me, like right now..." Zedai glared angrily at Cohen. "I can cripple your sword hand." Cohen rolled his eyes. "Have you found any connection between the Disaster Sword and Blood Bottle Gang?" the police officer asked dispiritedly. "No, it's still just things that both of us already know." Zedai snappishly put back the ancient sheepskin book in his hand to the shelves, "because I am very inefficient. And there is a student who is refusing to get up to help." Cohen pretended not to hear the last sentence. He contemplated and said, "All right, then why don't you tell me about the people of the tower's attitudes towards those disaster swords? How much do the people in the tower understand about them? Perhaps it would be helpful if I combine it with the information I saw in the police station." Zedai stopped moving his hands. He looked at his student and was silent for a moment. In the end, he sighed, "Very well, but if you want to know, you will have to join our secret group." "Secret group?" Cohen turned his head curiously. "In short, we are a small group of people in the Tower of Eradication who are entrusted with a special mission. The aim is to fight against the inheritors of the Sword of Eradication outside the tower, who are otherwise known as Disaster Swords." "I'm in." Cohen's eyes brightened. He must join them. He must understand more things about the Disaster Swords, about that violent type of power of eradication. Even if it is for Raphael and Miranda, he clenched his fists discreetly. "So readily?" Zedai asked in surprise. He then flashed a joyful smile. "All right. This group consists of Chartier and myself. Now, there's you, too." Cohen opened his mouth in disbelief. "There are only 3 of you, us. A small group of 3 people, fighting against the Disaster Swords." Cohen looked as if he had been scammed. He stared at his teacher in disbelief. "It's a joke, right? What's wrong with having 3 people? We are, after all, a secret group. We do have an official name." Zedai slapped his thigh and said with an unfathomable countenance, "Xiao calls us the Purgers." Cohen's expression froze. "Purge? To purge the traitors?" Then Raphael. "However, Chartier thinks that based on Crassus' blood debt, the League of Avengers is better." Zedai leaned his body forward, his expression was serious. "And in my opinion, based on the importance of our mission, we should be called." Cohen subconsciously wanted to cover his ears, but Zedai had already uttered the words, "The supreme team that will get rid of Crassus and bring the Tower of Eradication back to its glory and revive the extraordinary sword and then rescue Errol." Cohen watched his teacher with derision. "Haha, I was joking." The atmosphere was too serious. Seeing Cohen's expression, which was akin to someone who had just eaten something disgusting, Zedai laughed loudly and patted his shoulder. But then, he sighed. "It's too bad that, until now, our knowledge about that violent power of eradication is limited," Zedai said disappointedly. "After all, what was felt when battling with them was not the complete picture of their power of eradication." Cohen also became grim. "Is there no result at all?" Zedai looked at his student. A few seconds later, he pursed his lips and spoke seriously. "No, there are still some results. At least we are aware that the brutal and insane type of power of eradication that originated from the Disaster Sword, Crassus, is actually an imitation of a mysterious and terrifying power from ancient times." Ellipsis. "Look, Serena, why don't we sit down and discuss this issue properly? With a smile on his face, Thales looked at Katerina, whose face was full of despair, then at the complacent Serena. You don't have to be so violent. Oh, ah. Serena raised a brow and hurled Katerina away. Bang, asterisk. The latter crashed into a tree nearby. Struggling, Katerina raised her head. Serena walked towards Thales gracefully. Let it out. She glanced at the black coffin and flashed an enticing smile. How are you going to do it? Kick it with your legs? Thales' heart started beating uncontrollably. Calm down. At least she let go of Katerina. This is the only chance, I must seize it. The dark night black coffin can only be opened with the key that the ruler carries at all times, along with the blood of direct members of the Corleone family. Serena laughed playfully, which is to say, Katerina's blood or my blood. Katerina, who was a distance away, raised her head with effort and glared at them indignantly. Her limbs were regenerating, but the speed of her recovery was incredibly slow. Forget about regenerating, there is no more hope for a comeback, she thought in despair, in this battle between sisters, isn't there? Thales inhaled deeply. Rolana and the rest must had told you about how Ralph and I escaped from the dungeon in Vine Manor. Serena narrowed her eyes. Trembling, Thales tried his best to create his own story, making it sound more believable. I have a special psionic ability that can be used to break all shackles, why don't I give it a try on this coffin? Thales touched the sharp fragment of wood in his hands, which were placed behind his back. His heart was racing with anxiety. He did not have the ability to slice open the rope, however. Cutting himself should not be a problem. Even though the side effect of that power might be a little severe, it was just that, without the help of his hands, could he still successfully lose control? Thales laughed bitterly in his heart. Time to test whether I can deceive her with that, if gazes could kill, concept. Serena's steps came closer and closer. So, this is your psionic ability. But why did you think I tied your hands up? Lowering her head, Serena laughed coldly and said softly, I asked Rolana down to the smallest detail. Your psionic ability can only be activated when you cut yourself and blood comes out. This is to drive you towards a dead end, Prince Thales. Thales' heart shuddered. Had she noticed this from the beginning? Serena continued approaching him with her steps. That's far enough, Thales shouted, don't come any closer. He had already made calculations. Even if Serena came over in a flash from that distance, she would need at least a second. It was enough for him to activate that on the coffin. I have a piece of wood in my hands. Thales moved his body sideways and revealed the piece of wood. He then carefully and swiftly turned back. He spoke while panting slightly, it is enough for me to cut open my own hand. Do you really want to meet that mystic? He kicked the black coffin behind him. Do you want me to knock on the door for you to wake it up first? A chilly look appeared in Serena's eyes. This brat, is he betting on whether I will dare to take that risk? My dear Thales. Within Thales' field of vision, Serena stood still on her spot. She suddenly flashed a bright smile and threw her hands into the air. You must have misunderstood me. I did not plan to hurt you at all. For me, a living constellation heir is even more useful than a dead constellation heir, is it not? We have a promise. With each other's help, you will one day be crowned king, and I will regain my throne. Have you forgotten? The blood clanswoman from the Corleone family smiled brightly. Do we not have a marriage contract? Thales' brows furrowed. This old witch, ugly-faced woman. Serena extended her right hand and slowly clenched her fist. We will join hands, with the navy of your eastern sea hill and south coast hill, and our natural geographical advantages at the sea-gazing cliff, we will occupy the east and west coasts respectively. We can make the southern part of the Sea of Eradication, which is rich in eternal oil, into an inland sea belonging to the Starlit Night Alliance. Between Constellation and the Night Kingdom, we can share our gains and assist each other, intimidating our opponents from our respective peninsulas and making them hesitate in attacking us. For you, it would be Exted and Camus, for us, it would be Maine Ad Nox and Handball. Serena looked right at Thales. These were my initial thoughts. Do not trust her. Katerina spat out a mouthful of blood. She spoke with hatred. Only the most insane demons would dare to form an alliance with this poisonous bee *tch. Bang, *. Serena laughed coldly. She casually threw a snowball which sailed at a rapid speed. It hit Katerina and incapacitated her. Thales exhaled deeply. Serena continued speaking expressionlessly. I know that you are not a normal 7-year-old child. You have a maturity and wisdom that exceeds those possessed by your age. You would know that my idea is plausible. She extended her hand at Thales. We are allies. Thales lowered his head. Allies. Hiya. You intended to kill me earlier. Thales furrowed his brows as he spoke. It was to divert my younger sister's attention and defeat her in the end. Serena flashed a smile. It was a pleasure working with you. But Thales raised his head gently and shook it slightly. Serene, this is the last time I call you this. Serena's expression changed. Thales sighed. Let this deception end here. You never saw me as an ally at all, ugly-faced woman. Serena's gaze became cold. The first time we met, your words were already filled with lies. You said that you were the true heir of the Corleone family as well as the rightful and legitimate ruler of the Hill of Pain. In regards to this, I did not lie. Serena blinked her large, charming eyes. However, Thales, who had a deep impression of her other side, was not swayed at all. I was indeed the first in line to the Night Kingdom throne and heir apparent to the Nightwing King, Lori Corleone. Serena opened her mouth, sticking out her index finger and rubbing off a trace of blood from her cheek. She then placed her finger inside her mouth and sucked on it. This action made her seem even more attractive and seductive, but Thales was secretly anxious. How long can I drag this on? Where are Ida and the rest? With serene speed, there is only one chance to utilize this, loss of control. Besides, the effect is inconsistent. Unless it is at the last moment, I mustn't draw this card. But you did not mention the truth about you murdering the previous king. Thales shook his head. In other words, you are not a loser in the fight for the crown among those who have their eyes on the throne. Instead, you are a criminal who is guilty of a serious crime, who murdered your father the king, whose crime cannot be pardoned, and whom everybody has the right to punish. Serena's charmingly smiling gaze froze. Even if you become powerful, I'm afraid that no one in the Night Kingdom would support your coronation. Thales raised his head and stared at Serena. He spoke, enunciating each word clearly. There is no possibility of you regaining the throne at all. The sun was about to set. There was a deadly silence in the snow-covered land. Serena stared at him. She did not avert her gaze for a long, long time. I have had enough of you. Serena's smile disappeared. Her voice was extremely cold. Arrogant mortal, you are right. Even if I kill Katerina right here. The Sacred Blood Army is extremely loyal to her. Along with the clans behind those warriors who covet the Blood Ocean throne, Costigan, Sullivan and Lorelia. It is impossible for them to allow me to be crowned either. So, your true enemies are the opposers who can be found almost everywhere in the entire Night Kingdom. Thales shut his eyes tightly and exhaled. So, you need the power of a kingdom to destroy those opponents that you cannot match up to. Originally, I only wanted to borrow all your power to intercept Katerina. However, the assassination of the extant diplomat group gave me a massive revelation. Serena, whose face was as cold as frost, nodded. The death of an heir triggers war between kingdoms. Not to mention that the King of Constellation made a sacred pledge in public that if you die, the person who will avenge you will be the next king. Thales heaved a sigh. Serena shook her head and sighed. For the heir to Constellation to die under the shameless interception of the Night Queen, and for the latter to disappear without reason, how many ambitious schemers do you reckon would attack the Night Kingdom at all costs, or at least make a relevant pledge just for the throne of Constellation? After all, it only takes a week to sail with the ocean currents from Constellation's south coast hill, and across the Sea of Eradication to reach the Night Kingdom. War will wipe out the opposers in the Sacred Blood Army, and provide me with a more submissive Night Kingdom. Serena took a passionate step forward, and the true heir of Corleone would make vigorous efforts to save the situation at the last moment. So, this is the aim of the alliance. To borrow the power of Constellation to wipe out your opposers. Watching Serena's expression, Thales spoke quietly. The Starlit Night Alliance was a complete scam. You do not understand, childish brat. Serena laughed coldly and said, the purpose of an alliance is to fight against your enemies. Thales glanced at the unconscious Katerina. No, Serena said in a cold voice, what I meant was that, to form an alliance with your enemy, and then betray him at a crucial moment. Betrayal is the true essence of an alliance. Thales furrowed his brows tightly. I see, this is her logic for survival. The Starlit Night Alliance, the first act of diplomacy in Thales' life, became a complete failure at that moment. In the future, in the countless times Thales will sit before the negotiating table, he would be unable to help but think of this scene. At the same time, he would recall the true essence of an alliance, with wariness in his heart, as well as the Starlit Night Alliance between him and a certain blood clanswoman that only lasted for about a month before ending in failure. Thales sighed, as expected, to have an adorable, capable, lowly vampire with red eyes and silver hair, who is a childish brat with a sugar and ice personality, and has lived for a few hundred years, to suddenly appear to speak with me that sickeningly sweet voice and call me big brother, and even eagerly wanting to marry me. This tactic, I was the one who thought too much. He lowered his head in desolation. This world is, after all, not like the ones in those novels with simple plotlines. Chapter 90 Awakening 3. The descendants of Disaster Sword want to imitate a type of the power of eradication. Cohen raised his eyebrow. Imitate, does that mean, this type of power has a prototype to be imitated? Prototype? Zedai thought about it seriously and nodded. Yes, you can say that. There is a type of superpower that can act as a prototype, and one can imitate it. Cohen furrowed his eyebrows and muttered, superpower. The police officer said in a puzzled tone, this was how we addressed the power of eradication a long time ago. So the prototype of the superpower first appeared before the Battle of Eradication, that was at least 700 years ago. Longer, it was a lot longer than what you imagined. Zedai sucked in a breath as he recalled his discussion with the other scions. He then said faintly, the prototype you mentioned appeared from the age of feudal kings to the ancient empire, but the most famous record was during the climax of the ancient empire's first civil strife, there was a person who possessed that prototype superpower, who led the army into the capital of Triumph and cut off the Supreme Emperor's head. Cut off an emperor's head? Cohen widened his mouth in shock. Emperor, I would still believe you if you were talking about the small and weak final empire, but that was the great ancient empire. Why did history class never mention this? There was more than one time where an emperor was attacked by assassins during the 2 dynasties of the empire, and there were only 2 successful cases. As to why you did not know about this at all as a noble, Zedai put on a smug smile. First of all, it is because of the reason that is known to everyone. Constellation has very little historic information on the 2 empire dynasties. If you want to find the most complete historical material in ancient books, you would have to go to Main Ed Nox Dynasty's Flourish and Decay Pavilion or the Tower of Eradication's Truth Library. Secondly, the Jade Star royal family is the descendant of the Karo's imperial family, after all. Even if they know about this, do you think that the Supreme King would happily put the phrase, "the emperor was beheaded by the army," into the books? Let us return to our original topic. Zedai sat down cross-legged. This was Xiao's way of sitting down. Compared to his other method of sitting on his heels, Zedai felt that this sort of Far Eastern manner of sitting made him feel particularly like an expert, and he patted his saber. I heard that the fellow who murdered the emperor relied on this mysterious prototype superpower and defeated almost every one of his opponents in that era. Even the wizards had no choice but to be extremely careful when they met him. Every opponent? Cohen asked in surprise. What made this prototype so powerful? I am not clear about that. Zedai furrowed his eyebrows. There were records written in Crassus' own notes that mentioned this. The biggest characteristic of the superpower was that it did not have any special characteristics. No special characteristics? Zedai spread his hands and said irresponsibly, anyway, that was what Crassus had written over 100 years ago. It does not seem right. Cohen furrowed his brows and said skeptically, if this sort of superpower was indeed so powerful, would there be no one who would compete to learn and master it during the past 1,000 years, making it the most popular power of eradication now? Right, why was it not circulated widely? This is the strange part. Zedai had a mysterious expression on his face, as if he wanted Cohen to ask him about it. We have clarified this point. Cohen raised an eyebrow and crossed his hands in front of his chest, refusing to ask Zedai. The corners of Zedai's mouth curled up and he furrowed his brows as he stared resolutely at Cohen. But the latter was still showing no interest in knowing, as if he came to the library only for a stroll and to listen to a story. Finally, Zedai rolled his eyes at Cohen. He still could not resist the urge to pour out what was on his mind and said resignedly, Crassus' notes were quite vague, but only the information on the awakening and increase of levels for this power were recorded clearly. That was the research done by him and another scion at that time. Cohen stared at him, filled with curiosity. Zedai opened his mouth and quoted a phrase that sounded like a verse from the Far Eastern countries, experience life or death to become extraordinary, experience living and dying in order to scale a peak. Cohen widened both of his eyes and his mouth, then shook his head twice. I do not understand. Zedai sighed. Our usual power of eradication, including the 4 main original superpowers, all have to rely on our sword style that never faded away as well as combat practices to be awakened. But this type of prototype cannot be awakened through practice, and it is also unable to have any sort of increase in power based on our proficiency with it. Zedai narrowed his eyes in an enigmatic manner. As a power of eradication, only when its wielder is in grave danger and is about to die. Would it have a slight chance of being awakened? Cohen widened his eyes. Experience life or death to become extraordinary, experience living and dying in order to scale a peak, it can only be awakened in situations where its wielder will most certainly die. The wide truth library was filled with silence. Cohen widened his mouth in disbelief only after 3 seconds had passed. It cannot be real, so those who had this prototype power of eradication are all. Yes, Zedai furrowed his brows tightly together and spoke a few words in doubt and confusion. People who experience death. Cohen touched his abdomen with a ghastly expression on his face. There, on his abdomen, was a wound which had been formed when he was pierced by the disaster swordsman of Blood Bottle Gang. It was seemingly throbbing in pain. Zedai looked perplexed when he said, the awakened who had this prototype power of eradication were the small handful of lucky ones on the battlefield. They had to suffer fatal injuries to be able to awaken, and I guess that more than half of those awakened died from their injuries not long after they experienced their awakening. Let's say, for example, your throat has been slashed, but you do not die immediately and such a power is awakened within you. Then, you would have recuperative abilities comparable to a dragon's. You would be able to stand up, alive and kicking after all of your injuries are healed. Cohen's brows were wrinkled together. It does not sound like something a human can do. The police shook his head in disbelief. He could not understand the meaning of this power. But at the end of the day, it did appear. His teacher hung his head and said, I still have another guess that Xiao very much agrees with. Under Cohen's gaze, Zedai held his breath and slowly relayed his inference. The stronger the people are, like those in supreme class or super class, the terms and conditions for them to upgrade this power of eradication would be harsher. The deadly situation needed would be even more brutal, and the mortality rate would also be higher. That was why Crassus thought of imitation instead of copying it down to the very last detail. Cohen sighed. I guess, that sort of frantic and ruthless vibe was a residual effect of this power, which courts death. Zedai nodded. That was the reason why even after the lucky ones survived and obtained the power, they still had to go through even more devastating deaths again and again if they wanted to increase their level and become stronger. Very few people survived, the others were. Zedai sighed. Thus, it is absolutely impossible for it to circulate in a large scale. Do you not think that it is very contradicting? Cohen raised his hand and objected from the floor. If you want to awaken that power, you must seek death. If you want to become stronger, you must also seek death. Then, what is the purpose of me practicing this power of eradication? Haha, becoming stronger is not necessarily just for surviving. Zedai Tafner, the Tower of Eradication's Supreme Class Scion, chuckled. Do not underestimate a person's determination in pursuing power and becoming a powerful person. Was Disaster Sword Crassus not an example? Why do you think he wanted to imitate this highly dangerous power of eradication? Cohen furrowed his brows. Power. Become stronger. Raphael. What is your purpose anyway? Cohen touched his head and thought of a question. Other than that person who murdered the emperor, are there any more records of the others who awakened? Who is the first awakened in history? Did I not tell you? Zedai scratched his head gracelessly. If Director Lorbeck was here, he would recognize that this head-scratching motion was almost exactly the same as Cohen's. We flipped through every ancient book. Shao even went to main Ed Nox Dynasty's Flourish and Decay Pavilion. The first suspected record appeared during the Uncivilized period, during the Iron Blood King's world-famous, mankind's final defensive line. A 16-year-old soldier who was seriously injured awakened to a type of superpower that could not be upgraded, and he became a laughingstock for a while. The second record appeared during the Age of Feudal Kings, before the Holiness Exorcism campaign. There was one 18-year-old ordinary class infantryman who came back alive from the Orcs' tight encirclement. He then mastered the superpower and became a superclass. Cohen scratched his own head. I guess, apart from experiencing death, and also the fact that they were all very young, you have not managed to find anything else, right? Zedai stared at him for a really long time. No, we did find something, Zedai muttered. All of these people shared a common characteristic. What common characteristic? Cohen's spirits were immediately lifted as he widened his eyes. Zedai gave him a mysterious smile. The two people mentioned just now fought against the orcs. It was before a period of time when mankind and orcs went into battle where they would awaken to this prototype superpower. The crucial point is right here. Wait a minute, you. Cohen looked at his teacher's evil grin and recalled his teacher's horrid interests. He became wary and could not help but gulp in difficulty. I recognize this expression. One person was within the tight encirclement, another was on the defense line. The police raised both of his hands and crossed them in front of his chest as he made an exaggerated defensive motion. He continued to furrow his brows tightly. Are you going to say? Zedai raised his eyebrow and stared at him. It was compulsory to do some indescribable things with the orcs, in order to awaken to that prototype, right? After Cohen had finished speaking, a familiar sound of the wind suddenly attacked him, just as he expected. Thud, asterisk. Cohen raised his hands proficiently and blocked Zedai's hand strike. Cohen snorted and laughed. As expected, the same move used twice would be ineffective against me. Slam, asterisk. Cohen's face went pale as he placed his hand on his abdomen. He stared at the scabbard in Zedai's left hand in disbelief. This guy actually cheated. What have you been thinking all day long? Zedai pulled back the scabbard. He thrust it out and said exasperatedly. In the West Line battlefield, the soldiers were all crude and large. Cohen rubbed his abdomen in pain. You had to be proficient with some of their nonsense in order to blend in. Back to the topic, Zedai said, exasperated. Cohen gave a dispirited smile and sat back up again. Remember the fellow who beheaded the emperor? We have records on that person who murdered the emperor. Zedai sighed. He was also a knight and a Northlander. Cohen looked confused. Zedai narrowed his eyes. The knight whom he served as his master already died when he was still a page. All along, no one taught that he was the person who murdered the emperor. Cohen shook his head. So? Zedai exhaled. That person who murdered the emperor only learned a basic sword style. Under Cohen's curious gaze, Zedai's eyes shone with a bright light. The ancient sword style to defeat the orcs. The sword style that is the origin of superpowers. Cohen came to a realization as he widened his eyes in shock. They could not have been any wider. Zedai gently held onto the hilt of his sword and said, the Northland military sword style. Thales lifted his head. If I die here, war between Exted and Constellation would certainly erupt, he said steadily and calmly. Constellation would be too busy to care for itself, let alone travel across the ocean to invade your country. 200 years of prison life taught me one thing. The vampire lightly pulled her cape tighter around her body, making her curvy figure even clearer and more alluring. However, her tone was very scary. The greatest wealth is the power in my own hands. Do not underestimate the temptation of power, Serena said indifferently, it can turn people crazy. Do you know how many casualties this will cause? Thales asked calmly. Serena seemed like she was grieving when she sighed. Yes, all those precious lives and blood sacrifices, but it is as a Far Eastern saying goes, the great general will achieve outstanding battle achievements on 10,000 dead bodies and skeletons. Thales lifted his head and his gaze was filled with determination. Lives are not toys that you are allowed to simply knead and play around with, ugly-faced woman. Do not call me that, I will get angry, Serena said quietly. Thales ignored her. You do not have the right, no one has that kind of right. Too bad. Serena's eyes sparkled with exotic colors. Since ancient times, many people have had this kind of right. Just as Thales was about to continue speaking to delay time, Serena decided not to bother wasting her breath on him again. In the next moment, she only said one sentence slowly, I finally succeeded. In his heart, Thales was puzzled. But he understood it shortly after. He suddenly realized to his surprise that he was unable to move a single step. Thales suddenly broke out in a cold sweat from fear. What is going on? Thales wanted to use a wood chip to cut off the rope tying his hands, but even his fingers were stiff. Generally speaking, my halting gaze only requires a few seconds to take effect on weak people. Serena walked nonchalantly towards Thales and took away the wood chip in his hand under his shocked gaze. But you are indeed a real descendant of the Empire. It took me such a long time to freeze you. Compared to my younger sister's power, this is not really a useful power in battle. Serena sneered. Why was I wasting my breath? Did you really think you were the only one who was stalling for time? Serena said coldly, every second that I have to speak with you disgusts me, little sh*t. Thales' face was pale as he stared at Serena, but his neck was extremely stiff. Serena smiled faintly. Are you ready to welcome your death, second prince? How did it become this way? Thales could slowly move now, but he had already lost his trump card. His heart was filled with incomparable remorse. If only I had. No. He suddenly came to a realization. It is still not too late now. Thales clenched his teeth and squeezed out a few words from the gaps between his teeth. Ugly-faced woman. Serena no longer concealed her expression. She blatantly revealed her hatred and disgust. Damned little sh*t, I really want to suck you dry. Thales suddenly had an idea. Right. Quickly, come and suck my blood. If that is the case. Serena's face got closer to him, and she sniffed him deeply as if she was smelling a delicacy. Her long lashes scraped his eyebrows. Yet, Serena did not do as he wished. No worries, I will not let you bleed and allow you to use that psionic ability, such a shame, isn't it? Serena caressed his face and slowly blew air into his ear. But still, I have spoken the truth. Your blood is really nutritious. The next moment, Thales' neck was forcefully gripped by Serena and he was lifted up into the air. Why is it this again? Thales cursed in his heart. He was not able to breathe once more. Serena sighed. Do you really think that I like to disguise myself as a little girl who cannot speak properly, and that I like holding back my disgust towards acting like a spoiled child in front of you? In the blink of an eye, Serena's gaze became cold. Or maybe, you thought that I would be really patient and wait for the day you become king. Then, I would wait until you become old and graying to give me a team of mercenaries, which would be of no use in restoring my throne. Her grip became even tighter. Serena, little girl. How dare you address me like that? I have lived longer than the sum of all your ancestors lives. She said fiercely, almost crushing Thales' throat. For your rudeness, she said coldly, I will let you taste the pain of being on the verge of death. Thales kicked his legs in pain. But, his hands were still tied firmly together and they could not even put up an effective struggle. I have gone too far, he thought in pain. A very long time ago, Hested told me that there was a Darkin from a tribe who was proficient in battle, and he once said something like this to his best ally. Serena stared at Thales' struggles nonchalantly while she said coldly, for the sake of our former friendship. I grant you a death without bleeding. Oh, that silly, yet thrashed sword style, which fell into ruin over the course of a few thousand years. Cohen placed his fist on his palm in realization. I thought no one ever practiced it again ever since the Quaker's Holiness Exorcism campaign over 3,000 years ago, which was during the age of feudal kings and after we thoroughly defeated the orcs. Be more respectful, Zedai said sternly. Even though many of its sword moves, which had the initial purpose of resisting the orcs and great dragons seemed childish and ridiculous in the subsequent wars, the Tower of Eradication's sign stood upright before Cohen's eyes, then seriously and solemnly said, it was after all, the origin sword, for superpowers. Since all four main original superpowers were born from this, it would not be impossible for it to give birth to a fifth foreign type. Wait a minute, Cohen came to a realization and furrowed his brows. According to this, we can already deduce the necessary requirements for such a prototype power of eradication to be awakened. Yes, Zedai nodded seriously. Firstly, you must be very young, maybe above 12 years old and below 20 years old. Also, you cannot have awakened to any form of power of eradication before. Secondly, you must have completely inherited the foundation of the Northland military sword style. Next, and this is the most important part, you must experience death but you cannot die immediately. Finally, you must have, what you said, a powerful recovery ability that is comparable to the great dragons, to come back alive from deadly injuries to ensure that your awakening is not the last scene of your life. And then, you have to repeat the entire process again. The Scion lifted his head and took a look at the sky outside the window. The sun had almost set. Zedai recalled the figure who carried his sword in silence, and also the oath he took when he left. I will find that power. No matter how difficult it is, and what kind of price I have to pay. If this is the path that has been set before me. Zedai Tafner lowered his head and sighed. But this is absolutely impossible. After a long period of silence. Cohen's expression was serious. He was not impolite this time around, but he used honorifics as he spoke. Teacher, does this prototype power of eradication have a name? Zedai paused for a moment before he slowly nodded. Yes. That person who murdered the Emperor gave it a name. Cohen's expression became grave. What is it called? It is related to the legend that you are very familiar with, having heard it for many times, Zedai said faintly. It is about death. It is the legend of the Bright God Church during ancient times. After people die, if their souls could not return to the kingdom of God, they would then go down to hell. At the gateway of hell, before the Seven Kings' residence, a dangerous and scary river would flow. Above the river was a crafty ferryman who rowed his boat all year long. He was in charge of receiving and guiding these souls of the dead. That river is called Hell's River. Cohen secretly trembled. That was the story he heard from his mother, teacher, and even servants since he was young. Maybe, that is not just a legend. So, when you see Hell's River, you also see death. However, the person who murdered the Emperor believed that, inevitably, there would be some people possessing souls that not even Hell's River would be willing to receive. The ferryman of Hell's River would then send those souls back to the human world. They had seen Hell's River, but returned from their deaths. Cohen widened his eyes. Zedai enunciated each word clearly. Therefore, the power of eradication obtained by coming back from death was named by the person who murdered the Emperor as the sin of Hell's River. Thales was struggling against the rope binding his hands. His blue lips were trembling as he resisted powerlessly despite doing everything he could before this unmatched power. Goosebumps rose on his skin due to the great pressure. His bones were chafing ruthlessly against each other due to his tight joints, and blood flowed to the surface of his skin. His heartbeat became increasingly faster as his heart throbbed under great pressure. Stars and darkness emerged before his eyes as his vision slowly faded away. It was as if there was a huge layer of glass between the air and his nose and mouth, which was stopping him from breathing. His gray eyes trembled as he watched Serena's grip become tighter and tighter. Thales was still struggling as hard as he could. His legs would not stop kicking as he wanted to struggle free of this dark and despairing shadow of death. But things became increasingly darker before his eyes. Until he lost his vision. Brain activity became exponentially tougher, harder, and slower because his mind was lacking oxygen. His thoughts were no longer clear. His memories started to become jumbled as numerous fragments of memories emerged prominently in his mind and gradually intersected with each other. His heart was throbbing like crazy as it wanted to deliver more oxygen to the brain. Yet, it was all futile. Then, Constellation's only heir, Thales Jadastar, stopped struggling. His eyeballs turned upwards and his legs slumped down powerlessly. His shoulders went slack and he became still, like a calm atmosphere that appeared when dead silence filled an area. Serena put on a satisfied smile. The sun had set in the east, and the dark night finally arrived. Thales Theron Garana Kessel Jadastar was dead.